Chapter 755. At 4:00 in the afternoon. Kanglan City, Beihai. A luxury bus slowly drove into the No. 0 Air Force Base in Beihai Province. The No. 0 Air Force Base was the largest Air Force base of the Beihai Corps. It was built in Kanglan City, the center of Beihai. It could be said to be the most high-end Air Force in the entire Beihai. There were more than 200 fighter jets and hundreds of armed helicopters inside. In terms of technical content, most of them were at the world's first-class level. Some of the fighter jets jointly developed by Beihai, Zhongzhou State, and Europe were even at the world's top level. The entire No. 0 Air Force Base could be said to be the biggest trump card to ensure air supremacy in Beihai Province. The luxury bus slowly stopped in the center of the base. A middle-aged fat man who took the lead slowly got off the bus and glanced around the airport with majestic eyes. The sunshine in Beihai was just right. The afternoon sun shone on the planes in the base, shining with a gloomy luster. The roar of helicopter rotors and the roar of fighter jets rang from time to time. Fighter jets swooped down and heavily armed helicopters slowly took off. A large number of soldiers in the base were busy doing daily maintenance. A major general of the Beihai Corps stood in front of the bus and looked at the fat man in front of him. His eyes were cold and he said calmly, "Hello, Director Liu." The middle-aged fat man with a ruddy face snorted softly. He ignored the major general's outstretched palm and said with a fake smile, "Are you in charge of the Air Force of the Beihai Corps?" "I'm in charge of this No. 0 Air Force." The major general narrowed his eyes, withdrew his palm, and said, "General Wang, you can't meet Director Liu because of a temporary matter. He asked me to apologize on his behalf." Humph. The fat man's face darkened for a moment, and he said sarcastically, "General Wang is really arrogant." Not only him, but more than a dozen men and women behind him also looked unhappy. The major general twitched the corner of his mouth, clenched his fists, and didn't speak. Wang Yu was the deputy commander of the Beihai Corps and the commander of the Air Force. He was in charge of all the air forces of the Beihai Corps and had the rank of general. Usually, he was like Director Liu. Who dared to speak ill of Wang Yu behind his back, let alone in front of him? Did the Wang family of Beihai really have the guts to step on them now? The major general took a deep breath and looked at the unhappy faces in front of him. He gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "Director Liu, please. I have nothing to say to you." With a straight face, the fatty said in a gloomy tone, "Can you represent the North Sea Air Force on some matters? I don't care what Wang Yu is busy with. Tell him to come see me immediately. I can't talk to you." The major general raised his head and looked straight at Fatty. Fatty raised his eyebrows. "What are you looking at?" "I'm here on behalf of the Central Continent. I'm here to patrol Section 0 and want to meet the Chief Commander of your Air Force." "Why? Is it too much?" "That's right. You're just a Major General. Our director has written a lot of reports to communicate with Wang Yu. Can you make the decision on these matters?" The men and women behind Fatty were all talking at once. They came from the equipment department of Zhongzhou State's military and were the first inspection team sent by Zhongzhou State to patrol Beihai. Fatty was a director of the General Armament Department and had the rank of colonel. If it was in the past, he naturally wouldn't dare to be presumptuous when he came to Beihai. But now, Beihai was in a precarious situation. As imperial envoys, who wouldn't want to step on them? This was a job where he could casually make some money. Fatty had been in Beihai for a few days and had visited 3 bases. He hadn't even expressed his stance, yet he had already made a 6-figure sum. Today, he had made up his mind to meet Wang Yu and take a big cut, but in the end, the other party wasn't coming? Fatty was extremely dissatisfied. Did the North Sea Air Force really think that he couldn't deal with them? That's right. Master and General Wang Yu talked about important matters. Can you represent Wang Yu? Humph, Director, it seems that the Beihai Corps isn't very cooperative. If you want me to read our report, I have to think carefully. In my opinion, the maintenance of these fighter jets in the base is very poor. I suggest that we send all these fighter jets to Yuzhou and properly maintain them. A young woman in her 30s smiled and gave her suggestion in a low voice. After finishing the report, she served the director on the big bed with another female colleague who had just joined the work. This was the director's original words to them. At this time, she felt that it was a good way to add insult to injury. Fatty's expression became more and more dignified. He stared at the Major General and said coldly, "I think so too. These fighter jets should be sent back to Yuzhou for proper maintenance." "Major General, are you sure that I want to write this in the report?" The Major General's face turned red. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Director Liu, we strictly implement the maintenance of these fighter jets. You've only been here for a few minutes. You haven't investigated at all." "Who said that we haven't investigated?" "We've already investigated, and all of our colleagues can testify. All of us will sign the director's investigation report. Our conclusions can stand up to scrutiny and have been carefully investigated." A young woman stepped forward and was almost plastered onto the fatty's body as she spoke in a menacing voice. The fatty was becoming more and more impatient. "Is Wang Yu coming or not? Call him right now. You can't bear this kind of responsibility." The call hadn't been made yet. The phone was already ringing. The Major General picked up the phone and looked at it. His expression changed, and he reflexively straightened his back after picking up the call. "Commander." The fatty's eyes lit up, and a sinister smile appeared on his oily face. "Is this Wang Yu? Give me the phone, I'll talk to him." The Major General looked at him with a peculiar expression. "Commander, are you sure?" "All right." He nodded and slowly exhaled before a sinister smile appeared on his face. "I understand." "What do you understand?" "I told you to give me the phone. I'll talk to Wang Yu." The fatty extended his chubby hand. "Gotcha." "Ah." In the fierce scream, the Major General grabbed the fatty's palm and suddenly broke it. With the crisp sound of bones breaking, the fatty's fat body directly knelt down and screamed. Bang! The Major General's knee directly hit the fatty's chin. Blood and teeth flew out of his mouth, and his scream suddenly turned into a whimper. "What are you doing?" The young woman exclaimed at the same time and subconsciously rushed forward. Slap, slap. In the crisp sound, the Major General's face became as cold as ice, and two slaps directly sent the two women flying to the side. The soldiers at the Air Force base next to them were about to move at once. In the neat footsteps, a large number of soldiers began to charge. The originally arrogant inspection team was all stunned. Looking at the Major General's epaulets and the soldiers rushing over, everyone's bodies were trembling slightly. At this time, the Major General's epaulets seemed to suddenly become extremely majestic in their eyes. "General. General, what do you want to do? Listen carefully." The Major General took 2 steps forward, pulled up the fatty, who was sobbing in a cold sweat, and threw him to the soldiers. "My name is Jiang Cheng, the commander of the No. 0 Air Force Base, the Major General of the Beihai Corps. If you can go back, write a report. Remember, my name is Jiang Cheng." His eyes swept over everyone in the inspection team, and he said coldly, "Tie them up and send them to Mount Dibbing. The Patriarch wants to see them." "Patriarch? Wang Xingshao?" Everyone's heart shook. Wang Yu didn't come. What did Wang Xingshao want to see them for? Buzz! An ear-piercing alarm rang throughout the base without warning. Countless signal lights were shining in the base. The next moment, all the soldiers in the base moved. In the sight of the inspection team, all the fighter jets took off, and the roaring helicopters were densely packed. An indescribable iron-blooded and resolute aura emanated from Jiang Cheng's eyes. He looked at the inspection team in front of him as if he were looking at a dead man. The fatty's face was pale, his legs trembled, and he directly peed his pants. He knew what the scene in front of him meant. This was a war alarm. A war alarm of the highest level. The moment the alarm sounded, it meant one thing. The entire No. 0 base, even the entire Beihai, would completely enter a state of war at this moment. "General, Please enter the command room immediately. General Wang Yu is waiting for you for a meeting. A soldier raised his hand to salute, and his voice was calm and solemn. Okay, I'll go right away. Jiang Qing nodded, glanced at the horrified inspection team, and sneered, send them to Mount Dibbing. The ferocious soldiers rushed over and bound their bodies before tossing them onto the plane one after another. Some of them fell in the wrong position, so they were kicked to the side. All of the members of the inspection team were trembling in silence. In that instant, everyone could sense the astonishing hostility emanating from the bodies of the North Sea Legion soldiers. It was like the most extreme outbreak after a long time of holding back. The fatty, whose palm was broken, was sweating all over his body. He didn't know if all this had anything to do with the inspection team. But he had a hunch that he might have made a mistake. A big mistake. The plane took off in his panic and flew to Xingzhou City. Through the window, the members of the inspection team looked at the land outside. Countless airplanes were taking off outside the window, and inside the base, countless soldiers were loading ammunition. The huge muzzles of the cannons were slowly rotating as they got into operation. Further away, from the Kanglan River to the North Sea, warships were gathering one after another. A huge object was faintly discernible in the sea, turning into a blurry silhouette. Countless B-Stinger fighters, which were smaller than normal fighters but faster, roared in the air and finally landed on the behemoth in the sea. That was the aircraft carrier of Beihai. The code name was City on Sea. Autumn Water, Floating Island, Queen City, Port of Tongtian. Everyone was moving. More than 200,000 troops of the Beihai Corps were completely surging at this moment. All kinds of troops, including the sea, land, and air, were constantly gathering. The fatty was obviously not the first, and there was no special enemy. 15 inspection teams were arrested almost at the same time. Then, they got on the plane and flew to Mount Dibbing. Some unfinished reports were also gathered at Mount Dibbing. The fatty's report was not the most intense. In his report, he said that the maintenance of the Wang family of Beihai's Air Force was extremely perfunctory. He suggested that Zhongzhou State transfer back all the fighters of the Wang family of Beihai for maintenance. Of course, there was no need to return to Beihai after the maintenance. But there was more than one report that was even more outrageous. Some inspection teams thought that the senior management of the Beihai Corps had committed serious malfeasance. Some inspection teams thought that many enterprises of the Wang family of Beihai were destroying the interests of Zhongzhou State. Similarly, some inspection teams thought that the Beihai provincial government had been seriously overstaffed over the years. More than a dozen reports and more than a dozen suggestions, none of which was good. It was suggested to transfer back the fighters, withdraw the warships, cancel the cooperation with Beihai, and investigate the senior officials of the Beihai provincial government. At the same time, there was a proposal that directly asked Beihai to report all the nuclear warheads stored in Beihai province, and the base should be supervised by Zhongzhou State. It required Beihai to hand over the launch codes of the nuclear warheads and the permission of the Wang family of Beihai to use them. If this series of suggestions was really adopted, the entire Wang family of Beihai would completely lose control of Beihai province. In all aspects, the strength of the Wang family of Beihai would be seriously reduced, and it would become a first-line wealthy family in Zhongzhou State from the strongest wealthy family in the dark world. Wang Xingxiao's silence seemed to make everyone misunderstand something. Therefore, the inspection teams completely looked down on the Wang family of Beihai, and their reports became more and more radical. At 6:00 in the afternoon, the night shrouded Mount Dibbing. Countless inspection teams were pushed to the top of Mount Dibbing. They walked up the steps leading to the stage of Formidable Person and looked at the figure standing beside the stone of Formidable Person. Wang Xingxiao turned his back to them and looked at Beihai in front of him. The waves were surging, and the huge waves slapped on Mount Dibbing, roaring incessantly. Wang Xingxiao, do you know what you are doing? Do you want to commit treason? I'm warning you, let us go immediately, and Beihai must hand over. An engineer of the inspection team who enjoyed the treatment of deputy governor said loudly. But before his voice died away, a sword light suddenly lit up in the darkness. The sword light kept splitting, and the dense sword energy enveloped the engineer's body. The incomparably shrill scream suddenly rang out. Blood was constantly splashing. Every piece of flesh and blood on the engineer's body was completely smashed by the sword light, and then the bones. The scream that made everyone's scalp numb lasted for 5 or 6 minutes before it completely disappeared. The engineer also disappeared, leaving only a pool of flesh and blood on the ground. Everyone was stunned. Countless people trembled and looked at the direction where the engineer disappeared, their faces pale. He really dared to kill people. How dare he kill people? How dare he kill the inspection team of Zhongzhou State? Wang Xingxiao slowly turned around. The military satellite of Beihai shrouded Mount Dibing. At the same time, all the signals of the channels of Beihai province and the news channels of each city of Beihai were taken over by Mount Dibing. The same picture appeared on the TV of every household in Beihai and on the internet. It was the desolate Mount Dibing in the night, the sound of the vast waves of Beihai slapping on the stage of formidable person, and Wang Xingxiao's calm and gentle face under the lights. At this moment, countless ordinary people of Beihai were looking at the new ruler of Beihai. Their patriarch. I don't understand. Wang Xingxiao said slowly. He said with a slight smile in his voice, faint and calm, I don't understand why the Wang family of Beihai is so targeted. For many years, the Wang family of Beihai may have done a lot of wrong things, but in the face of the entire Zhongzhou state, we have a clear conscience. When you were aggressive, we were willing to bow our heads, but why were you unwilling to let us go? You, Lu Tan, director of the General Assembly Department, in the few days since you came to Beihai, we have given you more than 600,000 yuan. Please let us go. You took the money, but you didn't do anything. You took more than 2 million. Your report disappoints me. You, 3 million yuan. You, 800,000 yuan. I don't understand. How did Beihai offend you? More than 20 million people in Beihai just want to live a better life. Why are you targeting us? There was silence. At this moment, silence swept through Beihai province like a hurricane. Countless people waiting in front of the TV were silent. But they did not panic. Instead, everyone was extremely calm. And extremely determined. I can't figure it out, so I invited all of you here. I want all of you to help me think about it. I want everyone who can see me to think about how the Wang family of Beihai has wronged you all these years. His eyes were calm. He reached out and patted the stone of formidable person beside him. This is the history of the Wang family of Beihai. He said slowly, you cannot understand it, but it doesn't matter. Today, I will tell you bit by bit. Chapter 756. Beihai was surging. In the loud sound of the tide, lights lit up on Mount Dibing. Countless dazzling lights gathered on the top of the mountain. The members of the inspection team were exposed to the lights and the countless people of Beihai. Men and women, old and young. The members of the inspection team, who patrolled all areas of Beihai a few days ago, looked reserved and dignified, and felt that they were invincible in Beihai, were all pale and frightened. The uneasy feeling of danger was like the undulating tide under the stage of formidable person, surging and surging. Everyone began to tremble slightly. Wang Xingxiao stroked the stone of formidable person beside him. His eyes were so affectionate and firm. He was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Before he became the patriarch, he had been here countless times. At that time, his invincible father stood in front of him. Standing here, he seemed to have completely suppressed the entire Beihai and overshadowed the glory of the stone of formidable person. But now, he was the patriarch. His parents were not here. He was the only one on the stage of formidable person. Countless lights shone on the stage of formidable person, on the inspection team, and on Wang Xingxiao. His face looked extremely pale under the light, but the hard lines on his face exuded unparalleled strength. In the light, he closed his eyes. The sound of the tide was endless. For the first time, he faced the stone of formidable person, which was carved with hundreds of years of history of the Wang family of Beihai, alone. He faced tens of millions of people of the Wang family of Beihai. It was not until this moment that he vaguely felt Wang Tianzong's original state of mind. At this moment, the entire Beihai province seemed to become quiet. However, an extremely crazy power was brewing in the seemingly peaceful situation. Qin Qianchong of the Qin clan, former chief of staff of the army of Beihai Corps, lieutenant general, graduated from the Beihai Military Academy. 15 years ago, he died on the border of Zhongzhou State in a joint operation between the Beihai Corps and the Border Control Corps. In that dispute, he formulated a strategy to withdraw more than 2,000 people of Zhongzhou State who were in danger in Annan State. In that battle, he finally retreated. When he died, he was less than 20 meters away from the boundary monument of Zhongzhou State. Wang Xingxiao's palm casually swept across a name under the stone of formidable person. Beihai has never thought of separating from Zhongzhou State. But now, I want to say that he is a soldier of Beihai. Wang Dongshi is the biggest philanthropist in Zhongzhou State in the past 20 years. He once controlled the North Sea Angel Fund for 16 years and donated more than 200 billion yuan of materials to Zhongzhou State in total. The Angel Fund he founded is still a first-class charity fund in the world. I can say for sure that when he made contributions to Zhongzhou State, he never asked for any return. Xia Yu, the previous head of Beihai Biological Laboratory. She has worked for the Wang family of Beihai for more than 40 years. During this period, she has jointly developed more than 10 kinds of gene drugs with Zhongzhou State. You may not be very clear about joint research and development, but I can tell you now that the so-called joint research and development between Beihai and Zhongzhou State, in all fields, including biological drugs, military equipment, industrial machinery, and so on, is borne by the Wang family of Beihai. His voice was still gentle, without the slightest fluctuation. Now there are 963 names on the stone of formidable person, including the 500 years of history of the Wang family of Beihai. He looked ahead, and his eyes seemed to fall on everyone in the Wang family of Beihai through all the media channels in Beihai province. I don't want to say that the Wang family of Beihai is the biggest contributor to Zhongzhou State. It doesn't make sense. I don't deny that for many years, the Wang family of Beihai did get a lot of benefits from Zhongzhou State. But I don't think that Beihai reported little benefits to Zhongzhou State. In my opinion, it should be more. The image of the satellite was always stable on Wang Xingxiao. At this moment, night fell on Beihai. On the land of 160,000 square kilometers, nearly 1,000 sets of weapon systems in Beihai province had begun to operate. Fighter jets took off and warships set sail. On the vast sea, the city on the sea rode the wind and waves on the vast sea. Countless missiles entered the launch procedure, and the Beihai Corps began to mobilize urgently. The rapid response force had been assembled. In the calm voice of the new patriarch of Beihai, the entire Beihai directly showed the fiercest and most ferocious fangs in the night. The interior of Zhongzhou State was already in chaos. Generals above the rank of Major General in the major theater of operations were asking about the intentions of the army headquarters. Countless people were in a panic. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State and Prime Minister Chen Fangqing had gathered in the information center of the Hidden Dragon Sea. The technicians struggled to break through the signal blockade of Beihai and contact Wang Xingxiao. Chen Fangqing, who had always been calm, had cold sweat on his forehead. He glanced at Li Huaqing, grabbed the headset, and said in a deep voice, "Wang Xingxiao, do you know what you're doing? I order you to stop. There are many things that can't be talked about. I hope you can remember these more than 900 names. They may not be indispensable to Zhongzhou State, but most of them have made great contributions to Zhongzhou State. Beihai belongs to Zhongzhou State. I won't ask anything of Zhongzhou State, just like in the past." Wang Xingxiao's voice almost spread throughout Mount Dibing. But in our most difficult time, we hope to preserve some things for Beihai, such as the dignity of more than 20 million people and the free will of more than 20 million people. I won't ask anything of Zhongzhou State, but I think Beihai should have the right to protect some things that we think are important. Wang Xingxiao walked down the stage of formidable person and stood on the steps, facing a group of members of the inspection team. "Professor Shui Haiyang, do you think my idea is too much?" I am the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. I want to think about my Beihai. Is it too much? No, not at all. A well-dressed middle-aged man in his 50s shook his head in a panic. His voice was trembling, and his eyes were full of regret. You don't think it's too much? Wang Xingxiao laughed. Then I don't quite understand. Since it's not too much, why did you describe the Wang family of Beihai as a cancer of Zhongzhou State in your report to Zhongzhou State? Will it even threaten the system and national security of Zhongzhou State in the future? Can you tell me why? That's a misunderstanding. The professor's body kept trembling, and he almost knelt down. These days, you have received nearly 4 million in cash from Beihai, as well as some other jewels and real gold and silver. Why did you only get the evaluation of cancer? What did Beihai do wrong? You said we were cancer. Why? Wang Xingxiao tilted his head and said with a poker face, so, doesn't your conscience hurt? Puff. Blood suddenly splashed out from the middle-aged man's chest. There was no saber light or sword shadow. Wang Xingxiao put one palm directly into the professor's chest. Ah! The members of the inspection team nearby all trembled with fear, and many of them screamed. Why? 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 Tell me. He crushed the heart with his palm. In the splashing blood, Wang Xingxiao directly tore the spine of the man. The sound of bones breaking and the screams became one. Xingxiao, I'm Li Huacheng. Don't be impulsive. Things are not irreversible now. We will call back all the inspection team immediately. We want to talk to you. Li Huacheng's voice rang in the headset. Wang Xingxiao raised his head and glanced at the sky. His face appeared on the screen of Yuzhou. There was no expression. The enchantress handed him a white handkerchief. Wang Xingxiao took it, wiped the blood on his palm, and threw the handkerchief on the professor's body. He walked back to Zhuanyuantai and looked at the inspection team below the stage. In the past hundreds of years, Beihai may have done a lot of wrong things, but I can say that we have a clear conscience about Zhongzhou State. So, why? When Zhongzhou State needed us, we never gave in. Why do you think this place is a cancer of Zhongzhou State? Because of the Beihai Corps? Because of our military strength? Because we are too strong? So when we are at our weakest, Zhongzhou State wants to rob us of everything? Including dignity, freedom, and even the foundation of our survival? His voice was getting louder and louder. If that's the case, then what is Zhongzhou State that we have served for hundreds of years? No one spoke. Everyone was looking at Wang Xingxiao. Even Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqin were silent. At this moment, in front of countless TVs in Beihai province, the picture suddenly changed. Wang Xingxiao's figure disappeared. 2 videos appeared on the TVs. They were both from Mount Dibing. But they were different from Mount Dibing. The night Li Tianlan went to Mount Dibing. The fire was fierce, and the sword energy was soaring. The sword that the mysterious chosen one attacked Mount Dibing turned everything into ashes, and the ground was white. Everyone saw the 2 videos. I remember a lot of things. I also remember that during the weakest period of the Wang family of Beihai, we didn't get any help from Zhongzhou State. All we got was temptation and oppression. I don't think Beihai and Zhongzhou State will become enemies, but now it seems that Zhongzhou State has abandoned Beihai. Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao, you. Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing's faces changed dramatically. Wang Xingxiao's voice was calm and cold. I want to reiterate one point. The violent sword intent gathered in front of him and formed a storm. The storm covered more than a dozen inspection teams and nearly 200 members. Wang Xingxiao was expressionless. The Wang family of Beihai will be weak and strong one day. But no matter what state we are in, the last thing we are afraid of is the enemy. Boom! At this moment, the entire Beihai province seemed to be roaring. One after another, streams of light rushed up from the bases in various cities of Beihai province, bringing a large area of fire in the air. It was like the prelude to the war. Hundreds of missiles were launched into the air. The next moment, they rushed directly into the sky. The faces of countless people in Zhongzhou State changed dramatically. Between the sky and the sea, the missiles shone like stars in the night sky. Missiles fell into the sea one after another, creating a deafening roar and stirring up a monstrous wild wolf. The Wang family of Beihai is fearless because there are more than 20 million people in Beihai province. You have been guarding Mount Dibing for the past hundreds of years, and Mount Dibing will be your strongest backing. From now on behalf of the Wang family of Beihai, I will recruit 800,000 soldiers from the entire Beihai province. Brothers and sisters of Beihai, the waves rose and fell. Wang Xingxiao's voice suddenly rose, overshadowing the wild wolf of Beihai, like a thunder. This era, the storm-like sword energy engulfed all the members of the inspection team. Blood suddenly burst out in the sword energy. Wang Xingxiao's last voice fell. There's going to be a war. In the past hundreds of years, the people of Beihai had traveled all over the world, facing different difficulties and opportunities, facing different people in different countries, and they would say that they were from Beihai. People of Beihai. This was the pride that came from their bones. It was Mount Dibing that gave them this pride. The mountain that had become a piece of white land and even been divided into two halves was like the tiniest flame, but it ignited the pride and faith of tens of millions of people in Beihai in an instant. This night, in Beihai, in different cities, in different corners, there were different people. All the people of Beihai were roaring and roaring in unison. The will of countless people was like a raging fire that swept the entire Beihai province. It burned everything and completely condensed the faith of hundreds of years. Long live Beihai. Long live His Majesty Sword Emperor. Chapter 757. The fire was burning. It was a kind of passion and fanaticism that most ordinary people couldn't imagine. That night, Beihai province, which had been quiet since Wang Tianzong disappeared, was restless, like a giant standing up in the valley, roaring and condensing its most powerful strength. The Beihai Corps had more than 200,000 troops. A cold and bloody atmosphere enveloped the entire Beihai province. The elite soldiers were endless, as if they were going to fill every street and alley of every city in Beihai province. Battles of various scales kept breaking out. The entire Beihai province ushered in the largest cleanup in recent decades. The Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Heroes Club, the Jiang family of South America, Jifeng Sword Raining School, the Vatican, and even Emperor Dong's palace, which had just gotten on the right track. Most of the other forces lurking in Beihai province were uprooted overnight. The missiles whistled in the air with a long tail flame, raging in the deep sea, and the city began to be stained with blood. The Beihai Corps was showing their strength and attitude in a very determined manner. At 12:00 in the evening, nearly 800 spies of various forces were sent to Mount Dibing, covered with cuts and bruises. Countless forces were trying to contact Wang Xingxiao, intending to redeem their senior intelligence personnel with benefits. This was originally a tacit understanding among the forces in the Dark World, but Wang Xingxiao directly broke the rule and refused all communication requests. The sword energy flew on the stage of formidable person, and the intelligence personnel from different forces were chopped into pieces by the sword light one by one. Nearly 1,000 corpses were directly thrown into the Beihai behind the stage of formidable person. Blood spread on the sea level, and the waves that hit the cliff seemed to be the color of blood. The enlistment order from the Beihai Corps had been officially issued to every corner of Beihai province at night. The Beihai Corps planned to recall all the veterans who had served in the Beihai Corps in the past 15 years and had a series of plans to recruit new soldiers. The wind and clouds were surging. The whole world was in a state of turmoil. In the center of all the storms, Wang Xingxiao threw the body of an intelligence personnel off the stage of formidable person. The entire Mount Dibing fell into silence again. He sat quietly on the stage of formidable person, covered in blood, but his aura was getting quieter and quieter. The soldiers of the Beihai Corps on the stage of formidable person retreated one by one. Then the internal defense force. In the end, even the experts like the Enchantress retreated. Wang Xingxiao didn't move. He just looked at the turbulent sea in the distance. One missile after another exploded into flames in the distance, like bright fireworks. The night gradually deepened. On the surface of the sea below the stage of Formidable Person, the smell of blood slowly dissipated. Facing the cold sea breeze, Wang Xingxiao sat on the stage of Formidable Person for a whole night. When the darkness gradually dispersed, he slowly stood up. Looking at the hazy dawn, he silently turned around and left the stage of Formidable Person. A squadron of fighter planes flew over Mount Dibbing at a low altitude and entered Beihai. The roar of the engine created a wave of sound. Wang Xingxiao looked up at the fighter plane that was gradually disappearing and pursed his lips tightly. It seemed that it was not until this moment that he really realized that after giving up the process of wrangling and compromising, no matter how glorious the Wang family of Beihai was before, no matter how powerful it was now, under his decision, the current Wang family of Beihai, he no longer had any trump cards. He took a deep breath, turned around, and walked down Mount Dibbing. This era, we're going to war. The loud and clear voice echoed in the somewhat dark office. In the long silence, a hand reached over and slowly closed the laptop. The office was filled with smoke. He pushed the window open, and the fresh air blew in with a chill. Outside the window was a vast expanse of silver. The dancing snowflakes occupied the sky of Fanio City. What do you think? In the low voice, Wang Qinglei was also smoking on the big screen. Smart approach, stupid behavior. Wang Xiaoyao turned around and looked at Wang Qinglei. He shook his head and said, "It's not easy." Wang Qinglei put out the cigarette butt and couldn't help but light another one. He said gloomily, "The little guy put himself in the position of the victim, which means that he won the hearts of the people. He did a good job after he went back. During this time, Beihai has been really depressed. He expelled Dijiang, captured Su Xinghe, and decisively cleaned up all the exposed weaknesses of the Wang family of Beihai. Then he started to fight back. Now Beihai's morale is high. You shouldn't have let him go back to Zhongzhou State. I'll detain him. In less than 3 days, sister-in-law will come here to ask me for him." Wang Xiaoyao said flatly, "I'm no match for her now. What should we do now?" Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and suppressed his agitated mood. At this time, being so aggressive will probably put us in a passive position. He was talking about us. The so-called us referred to him and Wang Xiaoyao. What did the parliament say? Wang Xiaoyao suddenly asked. There should be a meeting soon, right? I haven't received any notice yet. Probably tomorrow. Right now, the president is in the army headquarters building and has gathered all the officers above lieutenant general to study the situation. Wang Qinglei shook his head. At this time, the 9 directors of Zhongzhou State should have communicated with each other. In the face of a possible war, the attitude of the entire military was more important than that of ordinary members of parliament, especially in such a sensitive situation. Study the situation? Wang Xiaoyao sneered. What else is there to study? It's obvious that they want to fight to the death. Being cornered, he can put himself in a desperate situation. Does Zhongzhou State dare to do that? It's not a question of whether they dare or not. Wang Qinglei frowned and gave a wry smile. Whether to go to war or not, of course, it was not a question of whether they dared or not. It was not even a question of whether they could or were willing to. For Zhongzhou State, there was never an option to go to war in this game. Political games were not about fighting. In other words, it was an art, the art of balance and compromise. Zhongzhou State just wanted to take the leadership of the Wang family of Beihai, and that was the most important thing. It didn't mean that if you dared to fight with me, I would dare to kill you. If you had this kind of idea, you would not be able to get to the top. The top always pursued balance. This was the basic principle. In this principle, they would strive for the greatest benefits. Even if the war broke out and the whole Beihai was destroyed, so what? It was meaningless. If Beihai was destroyed, Zhongzhou State would get nothing. If it couldn't win, there would be endless troubles. If it won, it would also be a scene of chicken feathers. This option was impossible. So when Wang Xingxiao made it clear that he would fight to the death, Zhongzhou state would definitely take the initiative to take a step back to reach a new balance. This was Wang Xingxiao's cleverness. And his so-called stupidity was because this step was too tough. Zhongzhou state would choose to compromise, but it was impossible to give up Beihai. As the strongest overlord in the world, Zhongzhou state could not accept threats. At present, Wang Xingxiao's step could make Zhongzhou state retreat, but after the strong move, Beihai was destined to pay more for it. Wang Xiaoyao glanced at Wang Qinglei. If he guessed correctly, in order to reach a balance that satisfied all parties, the scale of the Southeast group would probably shrink. In order to stabilize the situation, it would probably directly harm Wang Qinglei's interests. But in Wang Xiaoyao's view, no matter what, it would damage the overall strength of the Wang family of Beihai. Was it stupid to do so? Wang Xiaoyao had a headache. In his view, Wang Xingxiao was still too young. "You're too anxious," he said slowly. No matter who sits in the position of the patriarch, the fundamental interests of the Wang family of Beihai must be protected. Now look at what the little guy did. Does it look like he cares about this? Wang Qinglei's tone was a little excited. "So you're too anxious. If you hadn't forced him to do so, he wouldn't have done this." Wang Xiaoyao glanced at him. Wang Qinglei took a big drag on his cigarette and was silent for a long time. "Do you think I have a choice?" After a long time, Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and said sullenly, "Recently, Yi Dongsheng has made a lot of moves inside the group. I can't help but be nervous." Wang Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes. Yi Dongsheng, the god of army. He was Wang Tianzong's close friend and one of the leaders with deep roots in the Southeast group. Wang Xingxiao and Wang Yuetong had stayed in Yuzhou for a period of time when they were young. During those years, they lived in Yi Dongsheng's home. From this alone, it could be seen the deep personal friendship between Yi Dongsheng and Wang Tianzong. Wang Xiaoyao had a very good relationship with him before. But after he came to Eastern Europe, the two had no private contact. "He wants a position?" Wang Xiaoyao was silent for a while and said with a faint smile. "Wherever there is a position for him, it's either his or mine." "Is he going to take Wen Siyuan's position?" Wang Qinglei said sullenly. Wang Xiaoyao nodded and somewhat understood. The Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast group were closely connected. The two existed in Zhongzhou state for exactly the same time. The Southeast group also experienced heyday and decline. For hundreds of years, at the peak of the Southeast group, 4 of the 7 directors of the Zhongzhou State Parliament came from the Southeast Group. During the period of decline, only 1 of the 9 directors came from the Southeast Group. And this person jumped from the position of Speaker of Beihai to the highest level. For example, the current Vice President of Zhongzhou State, Wan Qingyun, used to be the Speaker of Beihai. In other words, every time the list of the Parliament changed, the Speaker of Beihai was destined to enter the list of directors. This was also an important means for the Wang family of Beihai to stabilize its own foundation. At present, the Southeast group was not weak, but it was not in its heyday either. It was just one of the stronger groups among the 6. There were still 2 years before the next shuffle of the parliament. Some positions had vaguely come to a conclusion. Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, and other veteran directors would retire, while Dongqing Wudi would stay. Within the Southeast group, there would be 2 places to become a member of the parliament in the next session. Speaker of Beihai Wen Siyuan would become one of the 9 directors. The other, according to the normal development, should have been Speaker of Wuyue Wang Qinglei. Wang Qinglei's ability and Wuyue's status were enough for him to go further and take over Wang Qingyun's position. But with the constant turmoil in the Wang family of Beihai, the aggressiveness of Zhongzhou state, and Wang Qinglei's eagerness to make trouble, the current patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and some high-level members of the Southeast group obviously had other ideas. Yi Dongsheng's recent actions were a signal that made Wang Qinglei extremely uneasy. Wen Siyuan's position was unshakable. The remaining position would be directly contested by Wang Qinglei and Yi Dongsheng. Facing Yi Dongsheng, even Wang Qinglei felt a lot of pressure, so he had to take measures. This was also an important reason why Wang Xingxiao was so strong tonight and even did not hesitate to fight to the death. Wang Xiaoyao sat behind his desk and looked at the flying snow outside the window. He suddenly asked, "Which position does General Yi want?" "Dongxing Wudi's position. He can't get it. His position is still very stable. One level higher, and he should be Dongxing Wudi's deputy," Wang Qinglei said slowly. Between him and Yi Dongxing, no matter who was one level higher, they would have the title of vice president. But the point was that in Zhongzhou State, if it was just a simple title of vice president without other duties, even if it was not a decoration, it would not have any real power. The current vice president Wang Qingyan's actual job could be said to be in charge of personnel in Zhongzhou State. He was an important candidate to check and balance the power of the president and lead the direction of the Ministry of Personnel. With this power, he would have real power. A director. If Wang Qinglei went further, he should take over the current Wang Qingyun and strive to become the deputy minister of the army headquarters before the next reshuffle, establishing his position as the crown prince. If Yi Dongxing wanted to go further, he would be the vice president and also the deputy minister of the army headquarters. He couldn't replace Dongxing Wudi. If he went further in rank, he could restrict Dongxing Wudi's power, especially now that Li Tianlan had risen. If Dongxing Wudi took full control of the army headquarters, the situation in the future would be really unfriendly to the Southeast group. But if it was Yi Dongxing this time, Wang Qinglei would almost be abandoned by the Southeast group, and it would be difficult for him to make a comeback in the future, which would have a great impact on the layout of the Southeast group. Therefore, at present, there were people who supported Yi Dongxing and Wang Qinglei, which also meant that Wang Qinglei's position was unstable, and he could not be anxious. "What about those missiles?" Wang Xiaoyao asked. "The scheduled range of the missiles is a little short, and they all fell in Beihai. But the nearest one is less than 10 nautical miles from Liaodong, and they are all conventional missiles. The problem was suppressed by Qingxian of Liaodong," Wang Qinglei said gloomily. It was not impossible to suppress the problem, and it was not even a sea area problem. After all, Beihai was also a part of Zhongzhou State, and the sea area of Zhongzhou State was also the sea area of Beihai province. What was the problem of detonating some missiles in the sea? The question was why Qingxian suppressed it. The cooperation between the group and Dongxing Wudi should not be so close. Wang Xiaoyao frowned. "There are some problems here. Find a chance to contact the other party." Now it seems that Dongxing Wudi's attitude is very important. Wang Qinglei was thoughtful. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, "I'll try." The meeting in the building of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State ended late at night. When Li Huaqing returned to the Hidden Dragon Sea from the army headquarters, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing was already sitting in his office. Seeing him enter, Chen Fangqing stood up, skipped the formalities, and asked directly, "How is it?" Li Huaqing shook his head, picked up the teacup, drank some water, leaned back in the chair, and sighed. Chen Fangqing suddenly frowned, hesitated, and asked, "What's the problem?" "Dongxing Wudi's attitude is not very clear," Li Huaqing said bluntly. Both he and Chen Fangqing knew very well that now that the situation had developed to this point, they definitely had to make some concessions. However, in the face of such a powerful North Sea, even if they made concessions, the military could not act as if nothing had happened. The military had to show a tough attitude. This was the main topic of the meeting. But Dongxing Wudi's attitude was extremely subtle. In principle, he agreed to give a tough warning to Beihai, but not in the name of the army headquarters, but in the name of the parliament. From another perspective, the so-called agreement in principle did not make sense at all. It was tantamount to Dongxing Wudi kicking the ball back to the parliament and asking the parliament to give a conclusion. Why? Chen Fangqing raised his eyebrows. The cooperation between them should be limited to Li Tianlan. If Dongxing Wudi really has such an attitude, it is equal to the cooperation between the two sides in all aspects. What's the reason? I don't know. Li Huaqing shook his head. But it's not all because of Li Tianlan. Chen Fangqing looked at Li Huaqing inquiringly. I mentioned Li Tianlan's matter to him tonight. Before the meeting began, I hoped the army headquarters would make a tough response. I even proposed to let Li Tianlan go to Beihai in the near future. He couldn't have not understood what I meant, but he refused. Li Huaqing said blandly. Chen Fangqing took a deep breath, and his face became a little dignified. Li Huaqing asked the army headquarters to give the Wang family of Beihai a stern warning, and even proposed to let Li Tianlan lead a team to Beihai. His meaning was already very clear. In order to suppress the arrogance of the Wang family of Beihai and beat Wang Xingxiao, he was willing to let Li Tianlan out, let go of the matter in Tiannan, and put pressure on the Wang family of Beihai from another angle. That was to say, as long as Li Tianlan went to Beihai, he could return to Tiannan. Such a condition had been given, but Dongxing Wudi refused. He would rather let Li Tianlan stay in the desert prison for a while and help the Wang family of Beihai. Why did he do that? At this time, the two of them looked at each other and were a little confused. The toughness of the Wang family of Beihai at this time could be said to have violated a big taboo. Wang Xingxiao forced the council to take a step back. After that, Beihai was bound to give a huge concession. Dongxing Wudi helped Beihai, but it was impossible to be tough to the end. There must also be a compromise. This kind of compromise might be a few very valuable positions in the giant group, or even more benefits. His helping here was tantamount to harming the interests of the giant group. And the missile launched from Beihai is very close to Liaodong, but the Liaodong provincial government has not reported this situation so far. It seems that it has been suppressed. Li Huaqing said softly. Chen Fangqing took a deep look at Li Huaqing. Liaodong. It was the place where Li Huaqing used to work, and it was once regarded as the back garden of the academics. Bai Qingxian had been the speaker of Liaodong for less than one term, but she had already controlled the situation in Liaodong. And what she did represented not only Dongxing Wudi. Although she was Dongxing Wudi's wife, she was also Bai Zhanfang's daughter. That was to say, Bai Qingxian and the Bai family also agreed to support the Wang family of Beihai and let Li Tianlan stay in the desert for a while? Even at the expense of a part of the interests of the giant group? Chen Fangqing took a deep breath and lit a cigarette. The white smoke rose and lingered like a fog. All the situation became confusing in the fog. He shook his head and whispered, Dongxing Wudi. What is he thinking? Chapter 758. It was September 23rd, Li Tianlan had been in the desert prison for a year. Compared with the turbulence of the outside world, the desert prison had completely calmed down. The topic of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace inside Zhongzhou state had gradually decreased. The task force that had been investigating Qi Mulan's treason had also ceased to exist. The constantly changing situation seemed to have no effect on the desert prison, and Li Tianlan had a completely undisturbed life. The layout of the warden's dormitory was still the same. The only change might be that there were some plants in the originally gloomy dormitory. Some green plants that were difficult to survive in the desert were placed in the dormitory, adding a seemingly insubstantial breath of life. Yes, it was insubstantial. All the vitality looked extremely fake. The warden's dormitory, which looked much softer, became colder and colder in the eyes of others. Fewer and fewer people dared to approach the warden's dormitory. Life in the desert prison was boring and repetitive. Even the place where felons gathered still had its own liveliness. But the door of the warden's dormitory was getting quieter and quieter, and eventually became deathly still. Even several deputy wardens whose dormitories were close to Li Tianlan had quietly changed their places. Day or night, the warden's dormitory was quiet, without any breath. Xiao Mahai braced himself and stood in front of the door of what used to be his dormitory. His body was straight, and he deliberately slowed down his breathing. His body was as stiff as a statue. He didn't dare to knock on the door. He had been standing here for nearly 3 hours, but he didn't look impatient at all. He just waited cautiously. The desert was dry and hot. But this area was extremely cold. It was not the kind of cool that made people feel refreshed, but a kind of sharp and piercingly cold feeling, as if the blade of a sword was pressed against the skin, which made people's hair stand on end. A faintly discernible breath enveloped Xiao Mahai's body. As an expert of the thunder-shocking realm, he was extremely sensitive to power. Standing here, he could clearly feel that countless blades completely enveloped him. This was not sword energy, but more like a kind of momentum that made his whole body tremble. This momentum was constantly spreading with the warden's dormitory as the center, gradually covering the entire prison in a slow but incomparably determined manner. The warden's dormitory was extremely luxurious. It had its own bathroom, and one could also bathe in the sun. Therefore, Li Tianlan had been staying in the dormitory for 6 months and had never left it. He cleared out the TV, telephone, computer, and all the communication and entertainment facilities in the dormitory. He didn't want to receive any information from the outside world. He just asked Xiao Mahai for a lot of pen and paper. At first, Xiao Mahai was curious about what Li Tianlan was doing in the dormitory. He also had a channel to get information. Xiao Mahai did bring his daughter and sister to the desert prison. His daughter, Xiao Qing, was 21 years old this year. She was still young but not ignorant. She was a top student at Renmin University of Zhongzhou State. She was clean and pretty. Under her father's instruction, she suspended her studies from school and came to the desert prison to become the young highness's little maid. His younger sister, Xiao Shui, was a 30-year-old young woman with charming charm. She had just gotten married and had no children. Her moral integrity was obviously not important to Xiao Mahai anymore. He put his sister and daughter together with Li Tianlan. His meaning was obvious. He hoped that Li Tianlan could choose one that suited his taste. If he was not picky, he could try all of them. Xiao Mahai thought that although they were not devastatingly beautiful, they were stunning enough to relieve the boring life in the desert to a certain extent. However, from beginning to end, Li Tianlan never touched them. He didn't even show any interest in them. But he didn't drive them away. Instead, he let them stay. Therefore, Xiao Mahai had the conditions to observe Li Tianlan's daily life. In the beginning, Li Tianlan would politely invite them to have dinner together. Xiao Mahai would carefully record some of his favorite dishes, such as the time to get up, the temperature of the water he was used to bathe, the strength of the massage, and other trivial things. Xiao Mahai regarded them as the most important things and carefully wrote them down in the notebook. After memorizing them, he would destroy the notebook. However, these things seemed to be less and less useful now. According to his daughter, Xiao Qing, Li Tianlan spent most of his time in the room practicing calligraphy at first. The air in the dormitory seemed to become colder and colder at that time. After using the brush and ink sent by Xiao Mahai, Li Tianlan did not ask for more. Instead, he was in a daze. Most of the time, he sat on the bed or stood in front of the window. He could stand there for a whole day. He didn't know what he was thinking. Xiao Mahai carefully analyzed Li Tianlan's state and felt that it should be martial arts meditation. However, meditation could last for a whole day. The requirement of willpower was incredible. However, as time went by, the situation was getting more and more exaggerated. Li Tianlan was no longer practicing calligraphy. His meditation time was getting longer and longer. From the first day to now, sometimes it would last for 2 or 3 days. Some of the recorded schedules became completely irregular. Li Tianlan often didn't eat for 2 or 3 days and didn't need massages to relax. Every time those dishes he liked were sent in, they were either left intact or completely gone. Even the other dishes that Xiao Mahai matched according to the nutritious diet were all swept away. Li Tianlan's appetite seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. He could eat anything. Now, the amount of food he needed for one meal was almost equivalent to the total amount of food for more than 10 adults. Xiao Mahai occasionally came to deliver food to Li Tianlan in person. He was lucky enough to see Li Tianlan several times. With an increasing appetite, he could clearly feel that Li Tianlan's body was getting thinner and thinner. His spirits seemed to be stretched to the limit, and he became more and more haggard. But at the same time, every time he saw Li Tianlan, Xiao Mahai could clearly feel that his sword energy was getting colder and colder. Li Tianlan's strength seemed to be growing, and he felt more and more dangerous. The last time he saw Li Tianlan, he didn't even dare to look directly into Li Tianlan's eyes when he saw Li Tianlan's seemingly fragile body. The feeling of danger continued to accumulate and eventually turned into the most thorough fear. Xiao Mahai even didn't dare to face Li Tianlan. Documents from Zhongzhou State and Xianyuan City were sent to Xiao Mahai's computer almost every once in a while. The general trend of Zhongzhou State was surging. Xianyuan City was developing quietly and steadily. Xiao Mahai firmly remembered Li Tianlan's instructions. If there was nothing that needed to disturb him, he would suppress it all and not report to Li Tianlan. But this time, the situation was obviously different. After more than half a year, Dongqing Wudi would inspect the desert prison again, and there was another person with him. A special person who didn't belong to the system of Zhongzhou State, and no one even knew his specific identity. Military counselor of Samsara Palace. Xiao Mahai hesitated for a long time before he decided to come to Li Tianlan and tell him the news. There was no sound in the dormitory. The long, almost eternal meditation seemed to have no end. The subtle but countless sharp edges slowly spread. Xiao Mahai stood in front of the door and only felt that countless colds seemed to penetrate into his skin and internal organs. His whole body became a little stiff. Light footsteps could be heard. A young woman with a plump and enchanting figure and a very dignified and elegant face came over with a huge food box. When she saw Xiao Mahai, she was slightly stunned and said softly, "Brother." Xiao Mahai glanced at her and shook his head. The young woman bit her lip, took 2 careful steps, and slowly put the food box in front of the dormitory. The food box touched the ground with a slight sound. The eternal silence in the room seemed to be broken. A somewhat hoarse voice rang out. "What's the matter?" The young woman's face turned pale in an instant. She stood stiffly in place and was at a loss. Xiao Mahai's body trembled, and he subconsciously bent down and said respectfully, "Your Highness, Minister Dongqing will come to inspect the desert prison at noon tomorrow." Li Tianlan said yes. Military counselor of Samsara Palace will come to the desert prison with the minister. Xiao Mahai continued to speak. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. Military counselor. Obviously, Dongqing Wudi came here this time because military counselor had something to ask him. After the destruction of Samsara Palace, Saint had the closest contact with him. What was military counselor going to do here? And why didn't Saint inform him? Creak, the closed door of the dormitory was opened. Li Tianlan's figure appeared at the door. "Where's the official document?" Xiao Mahai's heart suddenly twitched. The sense of danger that made him deeply afraid almost rose to the peak in an instant, and even made his blood stop flowing. He subconsciously lowered his head, moved stiffly, and handed the official document in his hand to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan glanced down and nodded. "I see." He picked up the food box and turned around, intending to close the door. "Your Highness." Xiao Mahai's voice trembled violently. Your body," Xiao Mahai's voice was a little frightened. In half a year, Li Tianlan had completely changed. He seemed to be a little taller, but his figure was several times thinner. His eyes were calmer, and an invisible momentum was slightly fluctuating around him, as if it could penetrate the whole world. This Li Tianlan was extremely fragile. This Li Tianlan was also extremely dangerous. In Xiao Mahai's opinion, now Li Tianlan was like an extremely fragile but extremely sharp magic weapon, with the sharpness to cut everything, but he would break at any time. "It's okay." Li Tianlan took a deep look at him and suddenly asked, "Old Xiao, what do you mean by the real invincibility?" Xiao Mahai opened his mouth and finally smiled bitterly. "I don't know." He was in the thunder-shocking realm, and it was the hopeless thunder-shocking realm. How could he know what the real invincibility was? Only people like your Highness can have the answer to such a question. I can see it, but there is no way, so I have no answer. Li Tianlan said quietly, "I have found many ways." He narrowed his eyes and was silent for a moment. Maybe, the patriarch was right. Chapter 759. The dead dormitory was covered with a thin layer of ice. But the air was not humid, but extremely dry and cold. The sharp sword intent filled every corner of the dormitory. Countless tiny sword lights hovered around each other, shaking the space. The air in the dormitory gradually twisted in a shape visible to the naked eye, and then returned to its original state. Then, it was twisted again by new sword intent. Irregular distortions were everywhere. The space in the dormitory looked extremely vague, as if it were fake. Li Tianlan sat on the bed and silently looked at the document sent to Xiao Mahai by the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi. Military Counselor. Military Counselor's code name was directly written in the document. What did it mean? Dongqing Wudi did not need any reason to come to the prison for inspection. But military counselors coming here clearly had something to do with him. The fact that this matter could be written in the document also meant that it had been recognized by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. But strictly speaking, he was still a major suspect in Zhongzhou State. Why did the Parliament agree to military counselor coming here? Li Tianlan looked at his watch. There were still a few hours before the time stated in the document. He simply gave up the idea of studying the recent situation and raised his hand casually. With a slight sound, the stack of materials that Xiao Mahai had just brought over was instantly smashed into dust by the sword energy. Li Tianlan turned around, picked up a tablet from the bed, and turned it on. The computer was not connected to the internet, nor did it have any extra facilities. In addition to the most basic functions, there was only a video on the desktop. The video had been played countless times in the past 6 months. Li Tianlan watched it quietly. The overwhelming sword energy, mixed with fallen leaves, split the mountain peak, and covered the sky with a sword. In the past 6 months, after countless speculations and observations, Li Tianlan was more and more sure that, in a sense, this sword strike was almost equal to the end of martial arts. To be exact, the person who made this sword strike really stood on the end of martial arts. In the past 6 months, he had observed this sword strike countless times. Now Li Tianlan could roughly guess the power of this sword strike if it was made with all its strength. That would be truly earth-shattering. Even if Li Tianlan reached the ultimate peak, his achievement would be no more than this. So when the whole dark world was curious about who he was, Li Tianlan only thought about how he did it. It had been more than half a year. The other party was like a passerby in this world. After destroying Mount Dibbing with a sword, there was no news. The private plane was still parked at Beihai Airport. No country or force in the world had found any clue related to the other party. No one knew who he was. But now, Li Tianlan could vaguely guess how the other party had done it. His guess might not be correct, but in his opinion, this should be the path closest to the truth. This was originally the path that he had envisioned for himself. Standing at his current height and looking at the martial arts ahead of him at his age, he had many choices. Different paths represented different meanings. Li Tianlan had a clear but unclear plan for his martial arts. The reason why it was unclear was that he had too many choices. This road was the safest. The possibility of reaching the end of martial arts was slightly lower, but it was safer and took longer. At the lowest limit of this road, Li Tianlan estimated that he could reach the level of Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. The second road was relatively safe. It was possible to reach the end of martial arts, but it required a lot of accumulation. Li Tianlan estimated that if he took this road, even if he could reach the peak, it would take at least 20 or 30 years. The third path was the riskiest. To some extent, it was not safe at all. And the direction of martial arts represented by this path was a little vague. In other words, it could no longer be regarded as real martial arts. Walking on this path, Li Tianlan could be sure that as long as he did not die, he could make his lethality reach the real peak in the shortest time possible. He had been hesitating about his choice. With his character, the attraction of the third road to him was simply fatal. Before he made up his mind, the video in front of him directly gave him great inspiration. At least in Li Tianlan's view, the other party's sword could be called a model of taking the third road to the end. The so-called Third Road might not be a subversion of the map of God of War of the Li family, but to some extent, it could be said to be the opposite of the map of God of War. This road could also be said to be the original road. Li Tianlan slowly raised his palm. The morning sun had not yet risen, and the dormitory was dark. An incomparably faint glimmer appeared on his fingertips. The subtle sword energy slowly swirled around his hand. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the light on his fingertips, and his whole palm suddenly shook. Buzz! All of a sudden, a slight buzzing sound rang out in the silent prison, like the sound of a sword blade vibrating the air. The next moment, a slight cracking sound rang throughout the prison. With Li Tianlan as the center, the ground of the prison suddenly spread into countless dense cracks. The cracks spread rapidly and almost filled the entire prison in the blink of an eye. At this moment, all the prisoners in the prison subconsciously straightened their bodies. Everyone stared at the surrounding walls, dumbfounded. Cracks kept radiating out, and a dense spider web directly appeared in the prison made of alloy. The majestic and cold edge completely surrounded the entire prison. The cracks spreading in all directions rushed out of the maze prison and rushed into the square. The cracks on the ground zigzagged and extended, and the solid and transparent cover above the square had countless cracks. The majestic edge rushed out of the prison's surface, and a large area of yellow sand outside shook. The next second, an earth-shattering roar sounded directly. The desert prison seemed to turn from night to day all of a sudden. The awe-inspiring power exceeded the warning line of the third eye weapon system in an instant. The next moment, endless lasers and artillery fire kept shooting in the base, and the desert dozens of miles around turned into a piece of scorched earth in an instant. Not only the prisoners, but even Xiao Mahai was shivering and sweating profusely. The artillery fire raged endlessly. Li Tianlan stood in front of the window and looked at the bright fireworks in the desert. He lowered his head again and looked at his palm. A tiny crack appeared in his hand. Like the cracks on the ground, the fine cracks spread along his palm, and in an instant, his palm was covered in cracks. Blood gushed out from the cracks and slid on the surface of the wounds. Under the flashes of gunfire outside, his face looked a little pale. Li Tianlan looked at the blood in his hands and clenched his fists. A faint white mist rose from his blood-stained palm. White mist surged on his palm, and the small wound quickly healed. Li Tianlan was silent and expressionless. Expression. I'm fine. He suddenly opened his mouth and said. Xiao Mahai, who was not far from the dormitory entrance, paused. He hesitated for a moment before turning around and returning to his dormitory. His entire body was soaked in cold sweat. His face was pale, and he was still in a state of shock. After a long time, he picked up the phone and called the duty room, casually instructing them about the maintenance of the prison. He was not worried that the prisoners would escape at all. Although the blade just now tore the entire prison apart, it was still a hole. Not to mention whether the prisoners had the ability to break it, even if they could really escape, the endless gunfire outside the window, which could cover dozens of miles in an instant, was enough to deter them from the idea of escaping. Xiao Mahai put down the phone and was in a daze. He was no longer sleepy. He had heard of Li Tianlan for a long time. Li Tianlan had stayed here for nearly a year. Xiao Mahai had been attentively serving the man who was said to be the most likely to become the future chosen one. He was conscientious. But what had always made Xiao Mahai uneasy was that he did not know Li Tianlan's strength. He only knew that he was very strong and was the youngest expert of the invincible realm in the dark world. This statement was too general. In the past 6 months, the situation in the outside world had been turbulent. Although Xiao Mahai's confidence had not been shaken, as the situation developed, he became more and more anxious. Li Tianlan had not been able to enter the invincible realm for a long time, which made him a little flustered. But at this moment, looking at the dense cobweb-like cracks on the surrounding walls, looking at the lasers and gunfire that crisscrossed the world outside the desert, his heart finally calmed down completely. He was the warden of the desert prison, and no one knew the 2 military bases near the prison better than he did. Especially the fully automated Sky Eye base. As a fully automated military base, the warden also had the most basic control authority. Even if there was no one to control it, the Sky Eye base could still fight back, because the core of this system was added with an automatic identification system. And the measurement index was defined by the destructive power. The gunfire outside the window was still shining wildly and endlessly. Xiao Mahai turned on the computer and entered the weapon operating system of the Sky Eye. On the main page of the system, a big S was constantly flashing with red light. There were only two situations in which the system would automatically enter the state of fire. The first was when the prison encountered great destruction. The so-called great destruction was called X level in the system. The other situation was when the prison suffered great destruction. The code name of great destruction in the system was S level. The so-called destructive power was not limited to manpower, but a series of indicators such as blasting and bombing could be calculated in it. The destructive power of S level. In terms of the destructive strength of manpower, this kind of destructive power was close to the level of the peak of the invincible realm. Close to the peak of the invincible realm. There was no doubt that this was Li Tianlan's current strength. The strength when he had not officially entered the invincible realm. Xiao Mahai looked a little excited. Li Tianlan had been in the desert prison for a year. It was impossible for such a person to waste here for too long. Obviously, when Li Tianlan left here, it was also the time for him to leave here. The time should be getting closer and closer. Chapter 760. Dongxing Wudi arrived at the desert prison about 2 hours earlier than expected. At 9:50 in the morning, the helicopter landed slowly in front of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai, who got the news at the last minute, didn't even have time to inform Li Tianlan. He hurriedly came out to greet him. When he held Dongxing Wudi's outstretched palm, his upper body almost bent into the yellow sand on the ground. I was going to visit the military region of Beijiang, but I temporarily cancelled the trip. I'm early. Dongxing Wudi smiled and looked at Xiao Mahai with extremely friendly eyes. In the past 6 months, the giant group had suffered heavy losses, but the Dongxing clan had gained a lot. There were many opportunities for Dongxing Wudi to get some pretty good positions of real power, including the position of Chief of Staff of the Theater of Operations, which was originally prepared for Xiao Mahai as a reward. However, Xiao Mahai himself directly refused the transfer and held Li Tianlan's thigh firmly. This was exactly what Dongxing Wudi wanted to see most, and it was also the reason why he was willing to come here with military counselor. Therefore, although the transfer did not succeed, Dongxing Wudi appreciated Xiao Mahai more and more. Within the system, individuals could not maintain 100% absolute loyalty to the collective unless they stood at the top of the system. Dongxing Wudi had no intention of testing Xiao Mahai's loyalty. The attitude he showed that he at least had the qualifications to be trusted. Mahai, let me introduce you. This is military counselor of Samsara Palace, and this is Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai, the warden of the desert prison. It's the first time for you two to meet. You should get closer in the future. Dongxing Wudi laughed heartily. Hello, Your Excellency Military Counselor. Xiao Mahai looked up at military counselor and took the initiative to reach out. Military counselor was covered in a wide cloak. No one could see his expression, but there was a very friendly smile in his voice. Hello, General Xiao. Thank you for this year. It's all what I should do. Xiao Mahai, who understood what he meant, smiled and shook his head. He reached out and said, Minister, Your Excellency, please come in. Where's Tianlan? Dongxing Wudi walked into the prison and asked casually. His Highness should be meditating. Xiao Mahai said softly. Dongxing Wudi arrived 2 hours earlier. He didn't have time to inform Li Tianlan and didn't dare to disturb his meditation, so he didn't send anyone to call him. Dongxing Wudi didn't take it seriously. He just nodded casually and patted Xiao Mahai on the shoulder. Take me around. Military counselor wants to talk to Tianlan alone. The counselor nodded to Xiao Mahai and said in a clear voice, Thank you, General. It's nothing. Xiao Mahai shook his head, called a deputy warden to lead the way for military counselor, and accompanied Dongxing Wudi to the prison area. The military counselor followed the deputy warden in silence. He was thinking about what he should say next, but his mind was calm. The interior of the prison was cold and dry. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The sound of footsteps echoed in the surroundings, and the surrounding space seemed extremely spacious. "What's with these cracks?" Military counselor asked casually. He had long noticed the damage to the desert prison. Under the sunlight and yellow sand of the outside world, the countless cracks looked inconspicuous, but as soon as he walked into the prison, the cracks that bloomed like a spider's web on the walls and the ground suddenly became shocking. "It suddenly appeared last night. The warden has already sent people to repair it," the deputy warden said respectfully. "It suddenly appeared last night," military counselor pondered for a while. When he was about to speak, he suddenly found that the deputy warden who led the way in front of him stopped subconsciously. The dry and cold air in front of him instantly turned into the most eerie cold. The sharpness, which looked like a sword but was not a sword, gradually covered them. It was fierce, and gloomy. Standing in this sharpness, military counselor's body tensed subconsciously, and he didn't dare to move for a moment. Ahead is the residence of His Highness." The deputy warden's face was pale. He didn't dare to move forward and just pointed to a dormitory door in front of him. Military counselor took a deep breath, feeling the sharpness around him, and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I'm military counselor." His voice spread out in the silent space, bringing with it an echo. After a short silence, the dormitory door in his sight opened silently. Li Tianlan's hoarse voice sounded, brief and indifferent. "Come in." Military counselor narrowed his eyes and stepped forward carefully. The sharpness in the air moved forward quietly. It was very slow, but it would cover the whole prison sooner or later. Military counselor's figure became more and more cautious. It took him a full 5 minutes to reach the door, which was less than 100 meters away. Inside the door was a hazy and somewhat fake world. The sharpness seemed to completely tear all the space in the dormitory apart. The fragmented space kept floating, and the air was twisted. A thin figure stood in a fuzzy space, motionless. "Your Highness." Military counselor's voice was calm. In the dormitory, Li Tianlan raised his hand casually. The sharpness that was condensed to the extreme suddenly became stable. The fragmented space continued to gather, and everything in front of him suddenly became clear. Military counselor gasped. He stared at Li Tianlan, who had lost a lot of weight in front of him, and took a step back subconsciously. At the moment when the space turned from blurry to clear, the military counselor vaguely saw a divine weapon that had been completely unsheathed. Its sharpness was shocking, and the extreme danger and sharpness even suppressed his instincts in the shortest time possible. "Your Highness, you," military counselor took a deep look at Li Tianlan, then took a deep breath and said, "You gave up your biggest advantage? Advantage is meaningless." Li Tianlan said blandly, "Only real strength is meaningful. But this path is wrong." Military counselor's voice was a little annoyed. For hundreds of years, how many people who have taken this path have a good ending? He was not Xiao Mahai. At this moment, he could almost see Li Tianlan's current problem at a glance. The feeling of danger was too sharp. In military counselor's perception, this kind of oppression was even close to the level of the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's current combat capability might not be at the peak of the invincible realm, but it was definitely not far from it. What level was this? If distance was an explanation, Gu Xingyun, the former god of war of Zhongzhou State, flaming fire of Samsara Palace, even the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican who hid his strength, and Paul, the patriarch of Rothschild who had been in the limelight in Eastern Europe, were all experts at this level. Li Tianlan was less than 25 years old this year, but his real combat capability had already touched this level. This was not a good thing at all. His current state seemed to explain this. When military counselor saw him, he had already determined the path he had chosen. What was Li Tianlan's strongest point? From the perspective of battle prowess, his strongest point was naturally his sword intent. But overall, his strongest point was the dragon vein in his body. The endless life force of the dragon vein gave him a body that could directly walk to the end of the martial path. But now, Li Tianlan was deliberately giving up his body. He was deliberately lowering his body's endurance and pursuing the most terrifying combat capability in the fastest way. This was undoubtedly the diabolical path in martial arts. The advantage was that the speed of progress was amazing. It was the real way to achieve martial arts quickly. Military counselor thought of the map of God of War of the Li family, which had shocked the Dark World for hundreds of years. The map of God of War contained all the unique skills and inheritances of the Li family. The map of God of War pursued the balance of all aspects of martial arts. It used the flawless martial arts to control the strongest sword and break everything. But the path Li Tianlan chose now was almost the opposite of the map of God of War. It was very much like the path that the ancestor of the Lin clan, who created the map of God of War, took at the beginning. He did not care about his own weaknesses or the enemy's weaknesses. Such a path did not care about anything. He was a real invincible magic weapon. Wherever his edge passed, everything would be turned into ashes. The ancestor of the Lin clan had indeed made extraordinary achievements on this path. The Lin clan and the Li family today were enough to prove this. But the problem was, if this path was correct, why did he modify his own unique skills and create the map of God of War? Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan. A fiery light appeared in his eyes. Should I congratulate you? He asked suddenly. His tone was very serious, but his eyes were full of complexity. Congratulate me? Congratulate me for finding the most suitable path for me? Then I should really congratulate you. Li Tianlan smiled. The next second, his whole body flew out directly. The quiet military counselor approached him in an instant, grabbed his neck with both hands, and slammed his body against the wall. Li Tianlan could dodge and even fight back, but in the end, he did nothing. Bang! In the loud vibration, Li Tianlan's back collided with the wall. The alloy wall kept shaking, and some cracks expanded again. Li Tianlan's face turned pale, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth into a thin line of blood. You will fucking die. You will die, do you know that? Military counselor's voice, which was so angry that he almost lost his mind, roared, almost covering half of the prison. I congratulate you. Look at you now. Look at yourself. An ordinary half-step invincible realm expert can bear this kind of collision. You are fucking vomiting blood now. Is your so-called path right? Bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. You can succeed. If you continue like this, in 5 years, or even 3 years, you can reach Wang Tianzong's original height. Then what? How old are you then? 26? 28? You can't even live to 30 years old. What's the use of being invincible in the world? You will die. Li Tianlan coughed. Wisps of white mist spread out, and his shaken internal organs healed quickly. He looked into military counselor's eyes. Military counselor's eyes were full of almost crazy anger and regret, but this kind of regret was not for him, but for others. Bang! Li Tianlan's body shook casually, and military counselor's body was directly shaken a few steps back. Li Tianlan straightened up and said lightly, "Watch your attitude." My attitude? What attitude do you want? You are powerful, but I am not your opponent. Even now no one in the dark world is your opponent. You are invincible, so what? Invincible for a few years? You don't even have your own children now, and you want to die so much? Why should I pay attention to my attitude? Kill me if you have the guts, so that I can go down in advance and tell the palace master what the person she risked everything to help in Eastern Europe is like now. Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. Military counselor panted and stared at Li Tianlan. The temperature in his eyes slowly disappeared, and even the flames became cold. You are too excited. Li Tianlan said. No. Military counselor shook his head. He looked a little tired, as if he was at a loss after a long time of repression. I just feel that it's not worth it. He really felt that it was not worth it. It was not worth it for the woman who had planned for many years and finally put everything on the line in Eastern Europe. She really did her best to do everything. If she saw Li Tianlan now, how sad would she be? Military counselor's heart ached. He didn't even dare to think about this question. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said slowly, "Have you found the remains of the palace master?" The 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Snow Country, and the Wang family of Beihai were all looking for the remains of the master of Samsara Palace in Mormons. This was also an important condition of his deal with the Wang family of Beihai. Military counselor had always been in charge of this matter. No. Military counselor shook his head and didn't seem to want to say more. It's not worth it or not. It's my own choice. Li Tianlan glanced at him. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. Why did you make yourself like this? Military counselor sneered. It's hard for me to explain this phenomenon for the time being. But if I want my body to recover, it's not difficult for me. The vitality of the dragon vein has been strengthening my body's endurance. So before the lethality completely surpasses the invincible realm, I can always pursue the greatest lethality. The dragon vein can slowly repair my body. You're not here at the right time. I'm in the most delicate period. You can see that every time I fight, I'm basically injured. But in 2 months, this problem should be solved. I have endless vitality, which can form a new balance with the path I chose. Li Tianlan said calmly. Military counselor frowned and looked at Li Tianlan. Really? Do you remember the mysterious chosen one who attacked the Wang family of Beihai half a year ago? Li Tianlan asked, his eyes a little dazed. Military counselor's eyes flickered. If I'm not wrong, the other party should have endless vitality similar to the dragon vein, so he chose this similar path like me. He's not old. If he didn't come to the end of this path, he couldn't have such destructive power. Combined with his age, that kind of powerful power should also be squeezing the limit of his body's endurance. Li Tianlan said softly. So this is your martial arts in the future? Military counselor asked slowly. The ultimate martial arts still needs balance. Li Tianlan smiled. But I don't need it now, at least not before I surpass the invincible realm. He flicked his fingers, and the sword intent condensed into ice in the air. The palm-sized ice floated in front of military counselor, which was like pouring a glass of water for him. Li Tianlan waved his hand and said, "Sit down." Military counselor took a deep breath, suppressed his inner excitement, and sat opposite Li Tianlan. Let's get down to business. Li Tianlan said slowly, what do you want to do today? Military counselor took a deep look at him, hesitated, and said softly, I want to give your highness a suggestion. Say it. Li Tianlan said without raising his head. I suggest that your highness stay here for a while. Military counselor said seriously. Chapter 761. Li Tianlan took a deep look at military counselor. It was an accident that the other party suddenly came here, and his suggestion was even more of an accident. He had been imprisoned in the desert prison for a year, especially in the last 6 months. All his energy was focused on martial arts, and he did not pay attention to anything in the outside world, nor did he express any opinion on other things. Under such circumstances, military counselor suggested that he stay here for a while. Did he mean that the outside world was still stable? Moreover, if he could say such a thing, from another perspective, could it be that he could leave at any time now? What happened in the outside world in the past 6 months? Tell me your reason. Li Tianlan looked at him and said calmly. In fact, half a year ago, President Li Huaqing talked to Minister Dongqing about this issue. In principle, he has agreed not to restrict you, but the news was suppressed by Minister Dongqing. In the past 6 months, Zhongzhou state has been very lively. A few days ago, the president talked to the minister again about this issue, but the minister still did not agree. But there is news that in a few days, the other party should send a heavyweight to invite you out of prison in person. Military counselor said softly, but the minister and I hope you can stay here for the time being. I'm asking for your reason. Li Tianlan pulled out a special military cigarette, lit it, and said softly. Because of freedom. Military counselor said seriously, if there is no accident, the rumor is likely to be true, and it may be that Hua Xingyang personally comes to the desert prison to invite you out of prison. The other party is very sincere, but I hope you can refuse, because the real freedom is in your own hands. Military counselor picked up a stack of documents from the side and handed them to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Hua Xingyang personally came to the desert prison to invite him out of prison. This could indeed be said to be the greatest sincerity of the academics and the Prince Group. Hua Xingyang was not an ordinary member of Zhongzhou State, but one of the 9 directors, the second in command of the cabinet, and the leader of the academics. He could represent the will of both sides. To a certain extent, his coming was tantamount to giving Li Tianlan enough face. As long as he nodded, the matter of Qi Mulan could be completely over. He reached out to take the documents handed over by military counselor and glanced at them. Most of the information was about the more important things that happened in the past 6 months, covering a wide range of fields. On the 3rd day of February, the Wang family of Beihai launched a search involving the entire province. The search lasted for a week, and nearly 6,000 intelligence agents of various forces lurking in Beihai were arrested one by one. Wang Xingxiao refused the requests of the major forces to ransom them. He personally executed all the intelligence agents with a sword, and the blood completely dyed Beihai. On the 12th day of February, Xie Zhi secretly entered the hidden Dragon Sea to visit Li Huaqing. The 23rd day of February. The plan to recall the first batch of veterans of the North Sea Legion thus drew to a close. During this time, close to 100,000 veterans of the North Sea Legion had been re-enlisted. Beihai Conan. Beihai officially launched its conscription plan, with an estimated recruitment of 800,000 soldiers. In early March, Zhongzhou State held a parliamentary meeting. Dongxing Wudi strongly supported the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. In mid-March, Qinzhou Province, known as the backyard garden of the giant group, changed its commander. Tian Su, the speaker of Qinzhou, was transferred to Yuzhou. The reputation of the Tian family of the giant group declined greatly. The speaker of Qinzhou was a young man from the academics. At the end of March, Zhou Yunhai, the leader of the North Group, fired at the giant group in person, with the full support of the academics and the Prince Group. In early April, the deputy minister of the police department close to the giant group was transferred. In the same month, the Zhongzhou State Conference was held. The council rejected Dongxing Wudi's proposal that Bai Qingzhao serve as the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters. The person in charge of a large fleet in Beihai of Zhongzhou State was taken over. A storm swept through the military without warning, and a vice admiral with real power in the navy fell from his horse. The North conglomerates suddenly took action, and Zhou Yunhai used this game to completely stabilize his authority in the police department. At the same time, he took over the military power of Northern City. At the end of April, the boss of a large state-owned enterprise retired early, and the boss of a large bank in Zhongzhou State was secretly investigated. At the beginning of May, the Wang family of Beihai's 3 listed companies in Huading, Wuyue, and Yuzhou were suppressed, and a large number of shares were quickly annexed. In mid-May, after Su Xinghe, the governor of the Southeast Group was implicated and transferred from his current post because of the acquisition of the listed company. At the same time, Yu Chuanguang, the mayor of Huading and a close friend of Wang Xiaoyao, was transferred to Wuyue as the governor. Zhang Xiaohua, the director of Huading and the minister of supervision, was transferred to the Ministry of Supervision in Yuzhou. A capable general of the North Group was transferred to Huading as the mayor. From May of this year, all the achievements of the Southeast Group in plotting against Huading for several years were completely destroyed. At the same time, because Yu Chuanguang, who stood beside Wang Xiaoyao, had a firm stand, he cooperated with Wang Qinglei tacitly after he was transferred to Wuyue. For the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, when their achievements in Huading were destroyed, they officially lost control of Wuyue. Wuyue. For hundreds of years, this had been the most developed province in Zhongzhou state. It had been controlled by the Southeast Group, and it was their strongest fortress and back garden. For hundreds of years, until May of this year, Wuyue province was lost. This could be said to be the heaviest loss suffered by the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai in recent decades. Within the Southeast Group, Wang Qinglei had completely fallen out with Yi Dongxing. He grasped Wuyue tightly and was ready to make a move. The academics and the Prince Group seemed to be satisfied for the time being. They temporarily shifted their target from the Southeast Group, and all the firepower was aimed at the giant group at the same time. A storm. The North Group. It was still the North Group. The North Group, which seemed to have tasted the sweetness, once again became the vanguard. After the honeymoon period of cooperation between the academics and the giant group for several years, the first thing the academics wanted to take back was Liaodong, which used to belong to them. At the end of May, 2 directors close to Bai Qingxian in Liaodong were replaced. One belonged to the North Group, and the other belonged to the academics. In mid-June, General Nan, one of Dongqing Wudi's most valued backbone generals and the commander of the Navy of Zhongzhou State, was transferred to Yuzhou. Under the full opposition of the Southeast Group and the Giant Group, General Nan's position was changed from the Deputy Minister of National Defense of Zhongzhou State to the Deputy Minister of the General Staff. He was promoted but secretly demoted. However, compared with the initial result, General Nan at least retained some real power. A series of purges were carried out within the Navy. The North Group expanded once again, and the academics and the Prince Group occupied the majority of the profits. At the end of June, the Southeast Group, which had gradually stabilized, was in turmoil again. Fan Tianyin, the Minister of Security, voluntarily resigned from his position, which seemed to be the compensation given to the giant group by the Southeast Group. At the beginning of July, after a short and intense game and operation, Fireman, who used to belong to the Li family's sacred guards and was known as the strongest fire-flaming realm expert, officially became the Minister of Security of Zhongzhou State. Everything seemed to have undergone some subtle changes during this period of time. Li Tianlan looked at it carefully. Military counselor handed him the information. There was a list below each matter, which was the final voting result of the parliament. The list appeared again and again. It could be seen that the plenary meeting of the Parliament of Zhongzhou State was held very diligently during this period. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at it carefully. His eyes flickered when he looked at the list. There was no change in the attitude of the 9 directors on the list. But as time went by and events were updated, the attitude of some of the members below gradually changed. Some of the members who originally belonged to the academics and the Prince Group seemed to have different voices. In order to confirm this, Li Tianlan glanced down again. In July, the Minister of the Riot Control Department encountered a lot of reports. Although this senior general, who had always been close to the giant group, was finally taken down, the voting result became more and more interesting. At the end of July, the commander of the Black Dragon Army of the Border Control Corps and Lieutenant General Thunder God of Zhongzhou State was included in the adjustment list by the military. At the council meeting, Dongqing Wudi seemed to be unable to bear it. He flew into a rage and directly smashed a glass in the conference room. He even almost fought with a member of the Prince Group in the conference room. The adjustment was finally cancelled. The North Group, which had been playing a vanguard role recently, was silent this time and completely abstained. And the voting result inside the academics and the Prince Group changed again. At the end of August. Just a few days ago, the governor of Nanyue province was transferred to a deputy minister of a department in Yuzhou. He was also a backbone of a family in the giant group. The North Group exerted its power again. Although it didn't get the position of president, it successfully won the position of a council member in Nanyue province. And the voting result became more and more obvious. In the voting result again and again, there were members of the academics and the Prince Group who began to oppose the proposal of Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing. This kind of opposition was very subtle. The people who opposed it were different every time, but there were people every time. It showed that the two groups had begun to be in turmoil. Was it because of the recent fierce game that affected the general trend of the country? Or was it because of other reasons? Li Tianlan glanced at military counselor and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter? What do you see?" Military counselor said with a smile. The North Group has developed very fast in the past 6 months. Their strength has increased a lot, but some members of parliament have some problems with their attitudes. Li Tianlan said in a low voice. Indeed, it's for this reason that Hua Xingyang recently came to the desert prison to ask you to go out. They have gotten satisfactory benefits from the giant group. In order to calm some voices, they are now ready to let go of you, the main contradiction, and continue to target the Wang family of Beihai together. In other words, they decided to give you freedom. Military counselor said blandly, "But I don't think you need charity." Your Highness. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Have you ever thought about controlling a group that can control the general trend of Zhongzhou state? For example?" Li Tianlan said blandly. "For example, the giant group." Military counselor said seriously. "The giant group? Hee, after I go out, will the giant group still have the ability to control the general trend? Of course, and it will be stronger than now." Military counselor said affirmatively. On what basis? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Because I'm military counselor. Military counselor paused, suddenly raised his hand and took off his cloak. A thin middle-aged face that Li Tianlan was familiar with appeared in front of Li Tianlan with an easygoing smile. Tianlan. He chuckled and took the initiative to reach out his hand. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm military counselor. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Li Tianlan's body shook and his eyebrows suddenly raised. He stared at the middle-aged man in front of him and was silent for a long time before he took a deep breath. It's you. Chapter 762. The room was silent. Li Tianlan looked at military counselor quietly. Military counselor slowly withdrew his outstretched hand and looked at Li Tianlan calmly. It was you, but how could it be you? Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a conversation he had with military counselor in Huading more than 3 years ago. At that time, military counselor had already told him that the headquarters of Samsara Palace was in Zhongzhou state. It was in a place that everyone could see but could not perceive. Such a headquarters had no specific address, but it was the core of a large force and a very stable bond. Military counselor directly controlled the headquarters of Samsara Palace. You're surprised. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. He took off his cloak, and his attitude changed slightly. His temperament became calmer. I once heard from Yuetong that there are a few people in Zhongzhou state who seem to be low-key, but in fact, even the Wang family of Beihai has to treat them with caution. There are not many such people, and you are one of them. Li Tianlan said slowly, No, it should be said that you can even rank first. You mean the threat list of the major groups? Military counselor raised his eyebrows. I know this thing. It's meaningless. I don't know the so-called threat list, but the Wang family of Beihai really attaches great importance to you. Li Tianlan said blandly. He had begun to think quickly about how much impact military counselor's true identity would have on the whole Zhongzhou state once it was exposed. Has the Wang family of Beihai already suspected your identity? No. Military counselor shook his head. I've never done anything, and there's nothing suspicious about me. I've cooperated with the Wang family of Beihai the most, so they are the most guarded against me. In terms of hard strength, I'm sure I can't compete with the Wang family of Beihai. In some aspects, Samsara Palace is very advantageous. But the short-term development of Samsara Palace can't surpass that of Beihai, which has been accumulating for hundreds of years. Wang Tianzong is afraid of me because he doesn't know what I want and my weakness. Other groups are afraid of me because of this. Military counselor handed Li Tianlan a cigarette. In the lingering smoke, his voice was a little erratic. Your Highness, do you know the threat list of the major groups? Tell me the details. Li Tianlan was expressionless. He was not in a good mood. It was not because of military counselor's change in attitude or his subtle loyalty. It was because of his instinctive reaction when he was facing a behemoth that nominally belonged to him but he could not control at all. This was different from when he learned that Saint was Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana sword master of Mount Shu. Mount Shu was very strong and its swords were scattered in the southwest. It could be said to outshine the others in the entire southwest special warfare field, but Li Tianlan still did not feel threatened. As for the military counselor, he controlled part of the core power of the Samsara Palace. To put it bluntly, not to mention the newly established Emperor Dong's palace, even the Wang family of Beihai at its peak, with Wang Tianzong in charge, if the military counselor went crazy regardless of the consequences, the entire Wang family of Beihai would be dragged into a quagmire that they could not extricate themselves from. If the military counselor was his enemy now, Emperor Dong's palace would not even have the right to breathe in the face of his suppression. That was because the military advisor had no weaknesses. He didn't have a so-called family. As long as he hid abroad with his family, he could ignore everything. At this point, even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong or the future Li Tianlan couldn't do it. The former had Beihai, while the latter had Tiannan in the future. This was their biggest fetter. The so-called threat list is a specific statistic of some people who have the strength and potential to cause great harm to Zhongzhou State. The biggest feature of this list is that the people in Zhongzhou State are not controlled by the six but do not belong to foreign forces. How many people like this can there be? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and shook his head. Not many. As far as I know, not only the Wang family of Beihai, but also my name ranks first in the threat list of the six. From this point of view, Your Highness, even if Emperor Dong's palace rises and you enter the peak of the invincible realm, you are still not as good as me. Military counselor said with a smile. So Yue Tong reminded me more than once that you are the most important person in the entire Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan said quietly. That little girl, she studied in my place for a while. Of course, I didn't teach her myself. She is actually a very good administrator, but Wang Tianzong spoils her too much. Military counselor shook his head and looked at Li Tianlan with a faint smile. What else did she say? Was it after I bumped into you? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said lightly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that what she said makes sense. It doesn't matter. Military counselor said softly, Your Highness, what matters is that we are on the same side now. Li Tianlan said indifferently, without any emotional fluctuations. He looked at military counselor's eyes quietly and said in a calm voice, Are you? Of course. Military counselor's voice was calm. At least now, Your Highness and I are on the same side. Then when will it not be? Li Tianlan said with a faint smile. Military counselor was silent for a while and said slowly, After I give you all the things the palace master left for Your Highness, I hope to retire. Li Tianlan's palm trembled slightly. He thought of the master of Samsara Palace who had fallen in Mormons and whose remains had not been found so far. He thought of the meeting between the two. He lowered his head and said indifferently, What else did she leave for me? A saber. Military counselor said, The sharpest saber. Li Tianlan glanced at him. Military counselor had said that he was the saber holder of Samsara Palace. Saber, he whispered to himself and laughed at himself. I thought you would say that she left me a group that could control the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. Not only a group. Military counselor corrected him seriously. Saber is the core of the entire Samsara Palace. You can even understand it this way. Samsara Palace is the name of an organization. Saber is also the name of an organization. But no matter what the name is, it is the power in the hands of the palace master and the power she asked me to give to Your Highness. If you look at it from another perspective, Samsara Palace actually didn't exist, and neither did Saber. Li Tianlan glanced at him. Speak human language. What is Saber? It's an organization. Military counselor said in a serious manner. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he clenched his fists. In his heart, thousands of grass mud horses were roaring and galloping, almost overturning the whole desert. He smiled stiffly and reminded her, "You just said that they don't exist." "It depends on which aspect you understand it from." Military counselor said slowly, "It exists, but it also doesn't exist. Such an organization has no headquarters, no clear internal rules, and no rules that members of the organization need to abide by. There is very little information flow within the organization, and it never pays attention to anything. I'm the man with the saber, but I'm not the leader of Saber. Neither is the palace master. Such an organization has no headquarters and rules, and there is no so-called leader. From this point of view, Your Highness, you can understand this organization as a market." "A market?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "Yes, a market. There are even no so-called orders and obedience here. There are only two words in the organization that are the most important." Military counselor said seriously, "Interest demands and supply needs. So it's a market and also a platform." Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and motioned for him to continue. "As of 3 months ago, I roughly estimated that there are more than 30,000 people in the organization, among which there are nearly 200 officials above the level of deputy governor. The industries in the organization have been designed to cover nearly 400 fields in Zhongzhou State, such as clothing, food, housing, transportation, energy, weapons, financial stocks, network media, survey, aerospace, and so on. Let's not talk about the political level. Just talking about these industries, if they are all gathered together, we can mobilize more than 200 trillion funds in an instant. Speaking of other aspects, we can spread our voice throughout Zhongzhou State in an instant. Your Highness, do you know what this means?" Li Tianlan's heart suffered a huge shock. 200 trillion. Not 20 billion. Not 200 billion. Not 2 trillion. It was 200 trillion. It's impossible. Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously. This was even enough to overthrow all the orders. What's impossible? Military counselor was a little confused. Your Highness, did you say 200 trillion? You should pay attention to one thing. There's a precondition for the 200 trillion. That is, we have to integrate all our forces. In fact, this is simply impossible. We can only use a small part of it, a very, very small part. Mobilizing resources requires a precondition. Military counselor was a little helpless. Li Tianlan's heart moved. Is this the need you mentioned? Yes, someone has a need, so someone will provide resources, and finally, there will be cooperation. For example, if you want to make a movie, you need a series of preparations. In the early stage of operation, you will find different people and get through different relationships. Finally, you will form a small circle with the movie as the core. Everyone in this small circle has other connections behind them, and then a larger network of contacts is formed. Another example is that a member of parliament owes me a favor, and a mayor needs to seek a position at the level of deputy governor. I bring together people who have a need for benefits and those who can satisfy the need for benefits. If this matter is successful, then I will affect another small circle. I don't know if you can understand, but this is Saber, an obscure but almost omnipotent platform. Even many of the parties involved don't know that they are a member of Saber. What's the point? Li Tianlan shook his head. This is not an organization. It is almost equivalent to a miniature society. But when it comes to individuals, it is a behemoth that is too big to be controlled. You can't control it, and neither can I. You are too ambitious, military counselor said meaningfully. The military counselor said meaningfully, of course, it's impossible to control the complete Saber. However, countless circles radiate each other. In the beginning, there has to be a source, or rather, a core. Once we control the core circle, we can influence some of the forces on the periphery. By influencing and radiating each other, we can form a real general trend. Your Highness, I can't give you the complete saber because it's not mine. However, I can give you the core part that I can influence. He took out a list and handed it to Li Tianlan. These are the core members of the organization, but they are not my subordinates. They are important allies in the organization. Saber will not lead others, so there is no so-called dominance. The original intention of establishing the organization is not to control anything. We don't need loyalty. What we need is to use all kinds of power to create a situation that can satisfy us. I call this model the ally model. We use each other to get what we need. He patted the list in his hand. They are all here. Chapter 763. Incredible and Indescribable. Li Tianlan couldn't understand all the meaning of the saber for the time being, but just a part of what he understood from the conversation was enough to make him feel emotional. Samsara Palace had no so-called foundation or headquarters. When it was first established, it built a real micro-society. Li Tianlan looked down at the list in his hand. The list was not long, but in a specific field, every name on it could be said to be famous. High officials, generals, wealthy families, scholars, stars, they had everything they needed. These were the core personnel that military counselors could influence in their respective fields. Influence. Not control. Ally mode. Li Tianlan thought about these 4 words seriously. For a moment, he felt that the more he thought about it, the more interesting it was. He looked at the list in his hand again. After a long time, he nodded and whispered, "The creativity of a genius." The creativity is not outstanding. The difficulty lies in the resources. Military counselor said calmly. You did a good job. Li Tianlan said slowly. His voice was very deep. This was not praise. It was admiration. If I were you, I couldn't do it. I believe that even Wang Tianzong can't do it. Because I am military counselor. Military counselor said in a deep voice, I know my position very well, and I know what I want. I also know that the saber doesn't belong to anyone. He paused, shook his head, and said with a self-deprecating smile, for so many years, I've been trembling with fear and treading on thin ice. Hey. I'm really tired. You've worked hard. Li Tianlan's eyes wandered on the list in front of him, thinking about the so-called saber. Military counselor said that the difficulty lay in the resources. But there was one thing he was missing. Or quality. That was absolute rationality, or rather, self-restraint. For Li Tianlan, this was a difficult problem. Or, he didn't like this so-called ally mode very much. A behemoth that could exert influence but was illusory and almost non-existent. Unlike groups and countries, there was no specific organizational structure. What could ensure the vitality of this kind of organization was never power, but restraint. Li Tianlan couldn't evaluate which was more advantageous between this mode and the group for a while. The members of the group were united, their standpoint was clear, and they had a clear sense of the overall situation. They knew when to advance and when to retreat. Everyone could find a clear direction in the group. However, the ally mode did not need these. At the very beginning, this mode was extremely naked and used each other. What you could give me, I could give you. Everything was clear. There was no so-called loyalty or standpoint here, only obligations. However, this loose mode could make a clear voice within the major groups and form a visible force. It would not arouse too much vigilance. This was undoubtedly the most suitable mode for the Samsara Palace. As for the military counselor, as the hand holding the saber, he had only been quietly developing over the past many years. He had never tried to control any resources. Because of this, the area that the saber could influence was getting bigger and bigger. However, it could only be said to be an influence, not control. This kind of model did not allow for any ambition to forcefully control anything. Li Tianlan looked at the list in front of him. It could be said to be the core of the saber. The military counselor could not control them, but as an important ally of Blade, the fact that the military counselor had given him this list proved that he could exert great influence over the people on the list. Li Tianlan did not deny that these people could help him. But he did not like this kind of uncontrollable situation. He could not be as rational as the military counselor. Therefore, when he took over the organization, in the process of power centralization, the power would inevitably shrink, and to a considerable extent. I don't like it very much. Li Tianlan knocked on the list in front of him and said bluntly, there are too many uncertainties. I can understand. Military counselor nodded. But this is the best mode. How much of this organization can you control? Li Tianlan asked. I have never tried to control them. They are allies, not subordinates. Your Highness, in other words, this model is actually effective in all the major groups. Members of parliament within the group, and even the Li family, can be said to be important allies of the group. And the senior officials they promote are their core circle. This circle has countless resources and interests, so it eventually forms a larger and larger circle. First, it's allies, then it's the core circle of the allies, and finally, it's some fields that are radiated. When all of these add up, it's the group. And there are 6 such groups, that is to say, 6 circles, so today's Zhongzhou state is formed. Military counselor said helplessly. But this is not a group. Li Tianlan knocked on the list. This is Blade. It doesn't matter. Military counselor gave a wry smile. Every group is formed through countless entanglements of interests, and after a long time, the tacit understanding between generations. Saber has clearly defined the obligations of every ally. It looks a little naked, and the structure is very loose, but we've shortened the process of forming a group by many times. It looks nondescript, but when it comes to operation, the effect is the same. What if I ask you to control some resources in the organization as much as possible? How much can you control? Li Tianlan looked into military counselor's eyes and asked slowly. Military counselor took a serious look at him and kept silent for a long time. I've asked someone to make a general model. Well, I've asked a lot of people, including sociologists, psychologists, financial experts, and so on. It involves a lot of things, such as finance, interpersonal relationships, psychology, politics, law. I've been working on this model since you appeared, but it wasn't until recently that I received a rough version. If I break the structure of Blade now and start to centralize the power, it will take us about 5 to 10 years to complete the transformation with the full cooperation of the giant group. In the end, we can probably retain about 3 to 5% of the current strength of the organization. Even the most optimistic estimate is that the power we can directly control will not exceed 7%. Li Tianlan was speechless. He still couldn't quite understand the power of Blade, which needed specific operation to see the whole picture. Naturally, he couldn't understand what 7 out of 500% meant. He only knew that the degree of shrinkage was severe, directly shrinking dozens of times. Of course, even if it's only 5%, the specific power is roughly equivalent to more than 60% of the power of the North Group. Well, I mean the North Group 6 months ago. Military counselor said with a smile. Oh. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and thought of something. He said slowly, so you mean that the 5% you mentioned is equivalent to the power you can directly control now? It's influence. Military counselor's voice was very implicit. He pointed to the list and said, they are our allies. I respect them enough, and they respect me enough. Li Tianlan picked up the list again. Is this the 5%? He looked at the names on the list carefully, narrowed his eyes, and finally stopped at a name. Zhou Yu. Zhongzhou State Northern City Councilor, Deputy Speaker. He was Zhou Yunhai's nephew. To be exact, he was the future successor of the North Group. His significance in the North Group was equivalent to Wang Jingxin's significance in the Southeast Group and Zhou Yuanshan's significance in the Giant Group. And now, an important ally. Li Tianlan smiled and said frankly, 5% is not enough. 7% is not enough either. This is the limit of my ability. Military counselor smiled and deliberately emphasized a certain word. Li Tianlan glanced at him. But this is not necessarily the limit of my ability. It's the limit of my ability. In terms of management, I'm not as good as you. Li Tianlan said casually. He had never been arrogant, but he would not belittle himself either. If it was just about martial arts talent, he did not think that anyone in Zhongzhou State or even the whole dark world was worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as him. But to run a big force, manage everything well, be a qualified leader, and even be a great strategist, he did not think he had this ability. He knew a lot of things, but he could not be the opponent of those old foxes who were immersed in it all year round. With his age and experience, it was even difficult for him to figure out the specific meaning of the saber, let alone control it. It's not just a matter of management. The saber has developed to this point. What you see in front of you is already the limit, Your Highness. Military counselor said calmly, there are some things that I have, but Your Highness doesn't. Similarly, there are some things that Your Highness has, but I don't. For example? Li Tianlan rubbed the list in his hand. For example, the giant group. Military counselor said meaningfully, this is also a resource, and it is a resource that Your Highness can completely control. The saber is an ally, and resources are more important than anything else. Your Highness can completely control the giant group, so you can naturally use these resources to give our allies greater support and even pave the way for them. In return, they can also give Your Highness greater feedback. You're wrong about one thing. The giant group is not a resource that I control. There are so many powerful families, and there are always some who don't like me. Li Tianlan smiled. There are indeed. Military counselor said with a meaningful smile, but aren't they disappearing now? Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Military counselor's voice continued, reshuffling is the basis of the cooperation between the giant group and the southeast group. The southeast group temporarily adjusted its plan and lowered its position in Zhongzhou State for the next few decades to stabilize the overall situation and eliminate the influence that Wang Qinglei brought to the southeast group. The giant group also urgently needs reshuffling, or even transformation, and begins to centralize power from the previous loose structure. Simply put, the future of the southeast group is centered on Wang Xingxiao and Wang Jingxin, and all those who don't agree with this will be eliminated. The giant group is centered on Yu and Zhou Yuanshan, and those who don't agree will also be eliminated. This approach is tantamount to scraping the bones to cure the poison. Even if it succeeds, the vitality will be greatly damaged. Li Tianlan frowned and said slowly. The Wang family of Beihai has to do this. They are bound to compromise. In this case, it's better to take the opportunity to clean up some disobedient people. The strength of the group will shrink, but the cohesion will be stronger. Although the giant group is also shrinking, military counselor smiled and reached out to pat the list. But our allies are enough to help us get through the period of weakness. Li Tianlan thought of the North Group's countless vanguards in the past 6 months. He thought of Zhou Yu, the successor of the North Group. He thought of the shrinking giant group. All this was just because of the addition of a military counselor, or an ally mode. Everything became different. Tell me what you think. Li Tianlan looked at military counselor. I have no idea. It's not suitable for you to leave the desert prison now. Your appearance can only further intensify the contradictions within the giant group. It's not suitable for reshuffling. Military counselor smiled and said, and our allies are still looking forward to your growth. You need stronger persuasion to make them firm in their positions. The desert prison is very good. It's very quiet here, enough for you to calm down and become stronger and stronger. Think about Wang Tianzong. He won't intervene in too many specific affairs in the Wang family of Beihai, but with him, the entire Beihai is very stable. Why? Because he is invincible in the world. When a person is truly invincible in the world, his deterrence is no longer limited to martial arts. Only in that case can you control more of the power inside the saber. As for the outside world, everything is still under control. I hope that when you leave here, you will see a real new world. Chapter 764. Li Tianlan took a deep look at military counselor and suddenly asked, "How long do you want me to stay here?" Military counselor paused and laughed. "To be precise, Your Highness, how long do you want to stay here?" Li Tianlan tapped the table with his fingers and didn't answer. Military counselor wanted him to stay here. Li Tianlan himself didn't want to leave now. Although their reasons were different, they didn't conflict with each other. Instead, they were logical. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here to become stronger. Military counselor hoped that he could take back what the master of Samsara Palace had asked him to temporarily take charge of after he became stronger. The core was to become stronger. Li Tianlan looked down at the list with sharp eyes, as if he were looking at a real saber. He confirmed his thoughts again. He didn't like the extremely loose alliance model of saber. It could even be said that he didn't approve of it. The so-called disapproval was not about the alliance model. It was about the looseness. He didn't like any organization with a loose structure, even if it was more hidden and could play a miraculous role sometimes. But if it was too loose, it meant too much uncontrollable risk. He clenched his fists subconsciously. What he could grasp must be the power that he could hold firmly in his hands. When can you really enter the invincible realm? Military counselor asked calmly. I know what you mean. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He didn't ask whether Saber's allies had the possibility of merging with the giant group in the future, nor did he ask about the specific position of those allies. The current situation was that the giant group was constantly losing blood, shrinking in size, and decreasing in strength. But because of the existence of these allies, the overall strength of the giant group didn't decline. In the recent personnel changes in Zhongzhou State, the voices of opposition appeared at the top of other groups, which was undoubtedly the influence of the allies. But military counselor didn't know what they would do in the future, and those allies themselves might not have a clear attitude and idea. Everyone was looking forward to Li Tianlan's achievements. Li Tianlan's growth was directly related to the final attitude of these allies. Pure force didn't seem to be of much use, but at least Li Tianlan didn't think it was useless. There were too many examples in history where individual bravery couldn't achieve anything. But in Li Tianlan's eyes, this didn't mean anything. It only meant that martial artists who couldn't achieve anything were still not strong enough. When a person had the power but was unable to destroy the entire world, his actions were reckless. He did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, and he was a boor. But when a person's power truly stood at the pinnacle and could sweep away everything, he was God. The chosen one had no schemes. One strike was enough. The distance between a boorish man and a god was the distance between sufficient strength and absolute strength. In the eyes of those allies, if Li Tianlan had reached the peak now, the Emperor Dong's palace, with the help of the chosen one, would expand without limit, occupy endless resources, and rule the dark world. The strength of an individual could make his absolute will unimpeded in the dark world, and his power would also be powerful on the world stage. Such a person and power were absolutely worthy of any ally's support. And if Li Tianlan stopped moving forward, his current combat capability was also at the top level in the dark world, but if it was limited to this, his allies would only gradually drift away from him. At least for now, Li Tianlan's personal advance and retreat meant too many things. Li Tianlan's combat capability had been growing, but he had never broken through to become a real invincible realm expert, which had made his allies hesitate. So the only thing Li Tianlan needed to do now was to improve his strength. It was meaningless for him to leave the desert prison, except for the chores. Military counselor and saint could handle the ordinary chores. Military counselor was stunned for a moment and then said softly, "At present, the situation outside is relatively deadlocked. Both the Southeast Group and the Giant Group are waiting for a big shuffle. Although we are cooperating, there are some things that we don't know." After summer solstice visited Li Huaqing's attitude changed subtly. "I guess the two sides have probably reached an agreement, so now both sides are fighting to control the shuffle." Moreover, the two groups will also trade some positions. Your Highness, to tell you the truth, you are not very good at this kind of thing, which is why I suggest you stay in the desert. If nothing unexpected happens, the new balance will probably be reached in more than a year. That is also the most suitable time for you to leave the desert. 1 year later. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, Succession? Yes, at present, whether Li Huaqing can stay or not is very important. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said softly, if Li Huaqing retires, Wang Qinglei has the best chance. According to the usual practice, in the adjustment a few years ago, Wang Qinglei should have become a director. At that time, the palace master was very hostile to the Wang family of Beihai. We exerted some influence, but Wang Qinglei didn't go up. Now looking back, Wang Tianzong should have also noticed something at that time, so he secretly operated some things, causing Wang Qinglei to stay in Wuyue. In this way, even if Li Huaqing retires, although Wang Qinglei still has a chance, he is no longer popular. The new president is probably a transitional figure. For us, Li Huaqing staying in office is the most favorable situation. But what Li Huaqing wants is Beihai. Li Tianlan stood up and walked back and forth. You mean, when summer solstice visited Li Huaqing, she offered to support him to be re-elected, so that he would give up his suppression of Beihai? He shook his head. If he takes Beihai, he will have great merits and be famous in history. It is unlikely that he will accept it. Not everyone is as sharp as Your Highness, military counselor said softly. Taking Beihai is a big goal. It's the same as unifying the world. The goal is there, but not many people expect to achieve it in a short time. In fact, if you want to take back the dominance of Beihai, it has to be done little by little. Zhongzhou state doesn't allow Beihai to split, but Wang Xingshao has given his bottom line. So this game is a real tug of war. There can't be any results in a few years. Maybe it will be a game of decades or even hundreds of years. In fact, they have gotten enough in the past year. I think they will stop temporarily when they reach a predetermined goal and make plans slowly. After all, for more than a year, Beihai's conscription has not stopped. Nearly 200,000 veterans of the Beihai Corps have rejoined the army. At the same time, the Beihai Corps has recruited nearly 400,000 new soldiers. Now the entire Beihai Corps has more people than the Border Control Corps. Once an army of nearly 800,000 gets out of control. Hey! So you think that when he reaches a certain goal, Li Huaqing will take the initiative to compromise and take the olive branch extended by summer solstice? Although this is cooperation, it is essentially a threat. Li Tianlan said seriously. It's not a compromise. Politics is not a war, let alone a bottomless struggle. It's an art. Tianlan, you must remember this. There is the most delicate balance in the world here. Wang Xingshao intimidated Zhongzhou state with a tough stance that he would not hesitate to fight. The next step is to compromise, advance and retreat. Zhongzhou state is indeed stronger than Beihai, but it is impossible for Zhongzhou state to retreat step by step. In fact, after being strong, Zhongzhou state also has to selectively make concessions. The parliament made a strong move this time, and when it reaches a certain point, it is bound to stop. You can't think of it as bowing down. It can be said to be a change of strategy. A voice rang out at the door. Dongqing Wudi, who was wearing a marshal's military uniform, walked in and said meaningfully, those who can sit in high positions can't do everything without a purpose. Being strong or compromising is a way to achieve a goal. They made a strong move and encountered a problem after achieving their goal. Next, they must change their method and plot another goal. Minister. Li Tianlan nodded. So Li Huaqing will agree to summer solstice. The academics has not been in an ideal state in the past 10 years of adjustment. Once Li Huaqing retires, he is bound to be squeezed by other groups. It is very important for him to be re-elected. 5 years is enough for him to make arrangements for the academics again, so he will agree to at least some of summer solstice's conditions. He needs to use this time to win over some people to make up for the shortcomings in the political structure of the academics. Dongqing Wudi said quietly. Military counselor's eyes lit up, and a smile flashed across the corner of his mouth. Dongqing Wudi's statement coincided with his thoughts. Minister, you mean that thing is settled? Military counselor asked with a smile. Although he had great influence in Zhongzhou state, he was not a high-level official after all. So when they were alone, it was not appropriate to say something. Now that Li Tianlan was here, the meaning was different. Most likely. Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a moment and said slowly, the President and the Prime Minister asked me to communicate this issue. I don't understand. Li Tianlan said directly. It was a question, but it was also learning. He was really not good at the twists and turns in the so-called art. Military counselor asked about the candidate for the director of the Southeast Group after a year. Dongqing Wudi said softly. Settled? Li Tianlan thought of the competition between Yi Dongsheng and Wang Qinglei. It's hard to say at the moment, but the current situation. Yi Dongsheng and Wang Qinglei should become directors of Zhongzhou State at the same time. This is also the result that the Southeast Group can reluctantly accept. Yi Dongsheng. Wang Qinglei. There was no Wen Siyuan. No matter how slow Li Tianlan was, he knew what it meant. It meant that for the first time in hundreds of years, the speaker of Beihai did not enter the council. Is this summer solstice's compromise? The Southeast Group would rather give up Wen Siyuan and let Wang Qinglei go? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's not the Southeast Group that is unwilling to give up Wang Qinglei, military counselor smiled. It's the academics and the Prince Group that are unwilling to give up. Although Wang Qinglei is still the leader of the Southeast Group in name, in fact, he has completely fallen out with Xie Zhi. Letting him go up is tantamount to occupying a place that belongs to the Southeast Group, but he will not contribute to the development of the Southeast Group, which will greatly weaken the influence of the Southeast Group. Although Wen Siyuan can't go up, he will stay. He is still young, so he may have a chance in the future. Moreover, he has a high prestige in Beihai. When the Southeast Group reshuffles, it really needs Wen Siyuan to stay in Beihai to stabilize the army's morale. Wang Qinglei is very ambitious about Li Huaqing's position. After losing the support of the Southeast Group, he is bound to seek new forces. The academics is the most suitable target. He comes from the Wang family of Beihai and has a good relationship with some retired but influential old comrades. The academics very much hopes to unite these forces through him and make up for their shortcomings. Li Tianlan finally understood. So this is the change of strategy. After Wang Xingshao showed his determination, the academics and the Prince Group have already understood that it is impossible to forcibly oppress him, so they plan to disintegrate the Wang family of Beihai from within? Wang Qinglei is a very important chess piece. As long as they win him over, they can fully support Wang Qinglei and push him to the position of Li Huaqing 6 years later. At that time, they will plot for the position of patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. In this way, to a large extent, Zhongzhou state will take back the dominance of Beihai? That's about it. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth. But the details still need a lot of deals. The academics can't push Wang Qinglei without conditions, so the right way is to let him fight for the position of patriarch first. At least, he should have as much influence as summer solstice in the Wang family of Beihai. As a condition for supporting him, the speaker of Beihai province must be replaced by someone from the academics. It happens that Wen Siyuan should be facing retirement or becoming a director at that time, and this position will be vacant. In addition, the commander of the Beihai Corps will also be replaced. This may become a goal that we, including ourselves, will strive for at that time. We destroy groups but never target individuals. This is Li Huaqing's specialty and the key strategy that enabled the academics to get to where they are today. It is still effective to use it on Beihai province. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. For a moment, he couldn't even figure out how complicated the calculation was. He only felt that it was even more complicated than his swordsmanship. It's ridiculous, He took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "This is a trap. It's impossible for summer solstice not to see it. How could she agree to this kind of thing? This method." He thought about it seriously and said slowly, "It's just like fighting for a few years of breathing time. What's the point? Who knows what Wang Tianzong's state will be like a few years later?" Military counselor said blandly, "She's delaying and putting her hope on Wang Tianzong's recovery. As long as his injury recovers, everything will turn around. After his injury recovers, Wang Tianzong will be the heavenly son of the age." Is she so sure that Wang Tianzong's injury can recover? Li Tianlan didn't think so. She has no way. Dongqing Wudi said, she can't see the way forward for the time being, so she can only delay it. This is the price she must pay, or a compromise. Li Tianlan was silent. Wuyue Province, half of Huading, a considerable part of the Southeast Group's power, and a director's quota. This price could be said to be extremely heavy. Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a very important question. If Li Huaqing stays to help us complete the shuffle with the Southeast Group, then after he stays, if he stays, there won't be too many problems in the shuffle of the giant group. At that time, I will focus my resources on you. Li Tianlan's eyes flashed. Then at that time, the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group, it has nothing to do with us. Dongqing Wudi said flatly. His expression was very quiet, but there was a kind of resolute coldness and decisiveness in his words. Our biggest demand to cooperate with the Southeast Group is to smoothly complete the shuffle, that's all. Dongqing Wudi said. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. At this moment, he vaguely seemed to understand what politics was. The parliament of Zhongzhou State seemed to take a step back and only delayed the time for a few years, but it lacked the tricky opponent of the giant group. After the shuffle of the giant group, the group with Li Tianlan as the core was bound to be strengthened and absorb new blood. At that time, the giant group was also likely to become a member of the Southeast Group. So after the shuffle, we'll turn around and deal with the Southeast Group? Li Tianlan's voice was a little complicated. He didn't have a good impression of the Southeast Group, but this kind of relationship, which was close cooperation one moment and fierce in the next, still made him feel a little uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort had nothing to do with the Southeast Group. It had something to do with politics. Dongqing Wudi said it was art. But such art really didn't allow any sensibility. This was an art that was rational to the point of cruelty. After the shuffle, we need a period of time to integrate and connect with the power of military counselor so as to restore our strength. Of course, all this depends on your state at that time. If everything goes well, Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. At that time, I should also retire. You should not ask me about Zhongzhou State at that time. You should ask yourself, because at that time, you led the giant group to play in the parliament. How to deal with the Southeast Group was all up to you. At that time, I should also retire. Military counselor chuckled and said, Your Highness, at that time, it will be your stage. Chapter 765. Li Tianlan understood what Dongqing Wudi and military counselor meant. No one solved everything for Li Tianlan, including the master of Samsara Palace. All they did was try their best to create the most favorable environment for him. If everything went well, Li Tianlan's future fate, the fate of Emperor Dong's palace, the fate of the Wang family of Beihai, the fate of many people, enemies, and friends, all depended on how he chose. And the most important thing was the next year. 1 year. Military counselor hoped that he would officially enter the invincible realm. All the people who had expectations for him hoped that he would enter the invincible realm a year later. During the 2 years in the desert, he cultivated his mind and restrained his sharpness. Everyone was looking forward to the moment when he really soared into the sky. Because he was the heavenly son of the age, no one thought that such expectations were unreasonable. Even military counselor forgot that even after a year, Li Tianlan was only 24 years old. What people were looking forward to now was a 24-year-old invincible realm expert. If he could do this, he could even be said to be the youngest Invincible Realm expert in hundreds of years since the emergence of the Invincible Realm experts. That was a well-deserved miracle. Li Tianlan lowered his head and was silent for a long time before whispering to himself, 1 year. Dongxing Wudi and military counselor looked at him with concern. Dongxing Wudi moved the corner of his mouth, shook his head, and laughed. It's really difficult, Tianlan. There's no need to embarrass yourself. I've never heard of such a young Invincible Realm expert. You will enter the Invincible Realm sooner or later. It's not a big problem. He paused and continued, there's no need to worry about this year. In fact, if Li Huaqing can be re-elected, we still have 6 years. Before he retires, you can enter the Invincible Realm, which is in line with expectations. 6 years. This year, Li Tianlan was 23 years old. 6 years later, he was 29 years old. At the age of nearly 30, all aspects of his body had reached the real peak. There was no problem for him to enter the Invincible Realm. No matter how much people doubted Li Tianlan's potential, no one believed that Li Tianlan needed to enter the Invincible Realm until he was 30 years old because of his combat capability. An Invincible Realm expert who was nearly 30 years old still had the hope of entering the peak. This time was undoubtedly the most reasonable. Li Tianlan shook his head. It's not a difficult problem. Invincible Realm. What is Invincible Realm? There were Invincible Realm experts and Invincible Realm experts in the Dark World. This unclear but real division was enough to explain a lot of problems. The so-called combat capability of the Invincible Realm could already show that he was not weaker than ordinary Invincible Realm experts in terms of combat. But this word often represented an upper limit. He had never entered the upper limit of the Invincible Realm. In theory, if a person's talent was limited. In theory, reaching the combat capability of the Invincible Realm was his end. For some talented people, the Invincible Realm was just the beginning. The most important thing in the Invincible Realm was the domain. Li Tianlan's martial arts were mainly based on the sword, and the most important were the sword energy and sword intent. This kind of path was completely different from the domain, but the meaning was almost the same. This was because sword chi and sword intent could both form a domain. To some extent, the domain of the Invincible Realm represented perfection. For any Invincible Realm expert, the domain was the best weapon and the strongest defense. Now if Li Tianlan didn't have the dragon vein, his combat capability wouldn't be weak. But compared with the real Invincible Realm experts, his physical strength, resistance, and endurance in fierce battles were worse. Only his lethality was comparable to that of the Invincible Realm experts. In other words, the combat capability of the Invincible Realm didn't represent perfection. Li Tianlan's achievements today were largely due to the strong vitality of the dragon vein, which made up for his shortcomings to a certain extent. If there was an example, Dijiang, Saint, and Wang Xiaoyao were the best examples. They were all in the Invincible Realm now. In their current state, even in their heyday, they wouldn't be Li Tianlan's opponents. Because they had just entered the Invincible Realm and their realm was not stable, which meant that their mastery of their own domain was not perfect. But if they completely stabilized their realm, Dijiang's double thunder veins would be fully exerted, and this process might last for a long time. Many experts who had just entered the Invincible Realm were trapped at this step, such as those who were at the bottom of the holy list. But once people like Dijiang stabilized their realm, their combat capability would soar exponentially, and they could even rise to the level close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, or even directly enter the peak of the Invincible Realm. At that time, Li Tianlan naturally couldn't be Dijiang's opponent. Li Tianlan now had his own path. But for every Invincible Realm expert, the domain represented perfection. The domain of every Invincible Realm expert was their own path. The domain of an Invincible Realm expert was like a world they controlled themselves. Within the scope of the domain, their speed, strength, and defense were greatly improved. The process of perfecting their own domain was the process of the Invincible Realm expert's continuous breakthrough. The same was true of swordsmanship. When one exerted his domain and swordsmanship to the extreme, he was the so-called peak of the Invincible Realm expert. But this was the biggest problem for Li Tianlan. Because his current condition was too perfect. It was too perfect, so it formed a flaw. His strength, speed, willpower, and sword intent were all so outstanding that he couldn't find a way to mix them together to form his own for the time being. The possibility of swordsmanship or domain. This was also the key to his failure to break through. If he couldn't solve this problem, it would be difficult for him to touch the threshold of the invincible realm, and he would only be left further and further behind by his former defeated opponents. But at the same time, because all his conditions were too perfect, once he really combined them together, he didn't even need to stabilize his realm, and his combat capability could directly soar to an incredible level. Because ordinary invincible realm experts needed to perfect their domains after breaking through. Their domains were the most perfect relative to their state before breaking through. But after entering the invincible realm, they had flaws, and they needed to keep improving and exploring. And Li Tianlan, he didn't need to stabilize his realm. Because he was perfect now. Once he entered the invincible realm, his domain would be truly perfect. In other words, as long as he could successfully break through, he didn't need to do anything excessive, and he would be at the peak of the invincible realm. This kind of reversal of order in martial arts meant too many things. It could be said to be the potential to reach the peak in the future. But at least for now, it seemed to be a problem for Li Tianlan. To enter the invincible realm within a year. No, almost. It was completely impossible. He shook his head and suddenly asked, "How is Rushi now?" Dongxing Wudi's expression stiffened for a moment, then he shook his head and whispered, "She's still in a coma. I go to see her every once in a while. Rushi is now in Xianyuan City, Nayland Shuriying has been working in Tiannan, and Beihai has helped Xianyuan City build a biological laboratory. At present, Rushi is sleeping in the hibernation chamber, and the result is hard to say." Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered, then, he hesitated a little, but finally asked, "What about Yuetong?" "No news." Military counselor touched his nose with a bitter smile. "There was no news of her after she left Mount Dibbing last year. No one knows where she is now. My people have been looking for her, but there is no clue yet. If she wants to hide herself, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to find her." Li Tianlan smiled, and his expression was a little complicated. He looked at military counselor, narrowed his eyes, and finally did not continue to speak. "Your Highness, what do you want to ask?" Military counselor took the initiative to speak. He asked Dongqing Rushi and Wang Yuetong, and then? "Where's Little Bai?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at military counselor. "Why is she hiding from me?" Military counselor opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. "Wow, I've been in a bad state these days. This chapter is a little short. It's snowing today, and it's so heavy, I don't know why I said this. I just want to say something. Maybe I feel guilty because I didn't write enough?" You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.